Part 21. We've traveled through Tokyo, who still wants to simulate love? Author, Fei Se Hui-Xiang. Chapter 208. Minamoto's goal is very clear. She believes that the reason why she is in this state is the goddess Kaguya. You will soon understand the logic. What Minamoto Shinjin hates is Kaguya, Minamoto Hidenori and Hato Yamakotaro. However, Hato Yamakotaro is dead, and she has one less object to hate, so her hatred for Kaguya and Minamoto Hidenori is of course even deeper. Just as time will beautify the beautiful memories of the past, time will also further catalyze hatred. Unlike Minamoto Hideori, who is right in front of you and can plan and target at any time, Kaguya is more like a legendary existence to Minamoto Shinjin, but it is such an existence that has become the source of her pain. The pain of being unable to stand up from the wheelchair further condensed and fermented in the enemy whom I had never met, and eventually turned into a life and death hatred. Minamoto Shinjin says to you, as long as you tell me the news about Kaguya that you know, I will offer my sincerity. If you are willing to help me deal with her together, then we will be comrades in arms. You are surprised by Minamoto Shinori's hatred for Kaguya. She didn't even mention Minamoto Hidenori during this process. Perhaps because she sensed your hesitation, she confidently told you that as long as you are willing to help her, she is willing to work with you to deal with Minamoto Hideori. After you think about it for a moment, tell her that you need some time to think about it. The scene unfolds. Location: the house secretly owned by Mai Amamiya. Asaba Kazuma told Amamiya Mai about the relevant news he had heard from Minamoto Mizuru before, combined with the situation he had learned through so many simulations. Amamiya Mai thought for a while, then suddenly smiled and said, "This guy is really sick, don't you want to cooperate? Then cooperate with her, and I will also have a hand in it. Minamoto Hideori can't let it go, or..." Amamiya Mai glanced at Asaba Kazuma and said, "You are not willing to let him go either." Of course, Jian Yufengjian said calmly, "As for whether to take the judicial path to try him, we should just use some dirty methods. Let's see. My suggestion is to avoid future troubles directly." Amamiya Mai said cold words with a smile. To be honest, in the future deduced by Asaba Kazuma, if she hadn't been somewhat vigilant and arranged some operations, she might have been directly trapped in the old Minamoto clan at that time. She didn't take revenge directly, but she still considered making the best use of everything. After all, although she wanted to kill Minamoto Hidenori directly, she had some concerns. For example, if she killed Minamoto Hideori directly, who would restrain Minamoto Shinori and the forces behind her? Including now, when we are targeting Minamoto Hidenori together, it is also the other way around, borrowing the forces from Minamoto Shinjin's side and his own side to resist the factions that are still supporting Minamoto Hidenori. Amamiya Mai stretched out her hand and hugged Asaba Kazuma's neck, and said with a smile, "How about it? My strategy this time is pretty good. I just need to use some tricks to directly hook that guy Jensensen. He, I just don't know what state she will be in when she is at home." Asaba Kazuma looked at Amamiya Mai in confusion. Amamiya Mai shook her head and said, "You are just too serious, and without anyone's guidance, you won't even think about those naughty operations. Even the time I cheated Jensen, if I hadn't reminded you, you probably wouldn't have thought this way at all." Asaba Kazuma shook his head and said, "The main reason is because I have been able to suppress them openly, so I really don't care about this aspect." The corners of Amamiya Mai's lips raised slightly, and she took his hand and turned it half a circle. The two fell back on the fluffy bed. Amamiya Mai suddenly became a little confused and said with a somewhat erratic look, "Do you want to come? I have more time today." Kinya Kazuma didn't say much, and reached out to slowly unbutton her buttons. While untying it, he said, "You just said, what will she be like at home? What do you mean?" Amamiya Mai said with a smile. "What do you think it means, my good classmate?" Kinya Kazuma shook his head, "I don't understand clearly, but there is one thing I can be sure of. Amamaya smiled and said, huh? Tell me. Kinya Kazuma said, your smile now is really bad, there must be nothing good going on. Amamaya was stunned for a moment, then laughed. You guessed it right. It's indeed not a good thing, but it's not aimed at you, but at Minamoto. Amamaya's slender fingers gently traced Asaba Kazuma's chest. The faint warmth gave Qian Yufengjian an inexplicable feeling. He reached out and grabbed her restless hand, narrowed his eyes and said, you're not going to plot against Minamoto Shinjin again, are you? At this time, Amamaya was lying directly on the soft bed, and Asahi Kazuma was still bent over and did not fall directly. Her fingertips didn't take into account that Kinya Kazuma was holding her, and she continued to move Kinya Kazuma's body in circles, and then suddenly pushed Kinya Kazuma with her palm, signaling him to straighten up. Asahi Kazuma also understood her, so he directly adjusted his posture and sat on the bed. Amamaya wore a pair of black stockings today. The black stockings were very thin at first glance. It can even be said that with just a little force of both hands, the black stockings that I love you can be torn directly into pieces. At this time, the right leg wrapped in black stockings was slowly raised, the sole of the foot was gently placed on Kinha Kazuma, and he smiled lowly. Kazuma, you are very powerful in some aspects. I know this well after having experienced it. But you have to know that out of various scruples, I have been doing that thing in broad daylight. Why do you think it is? Asaba Kazuma knew without guessing that Amamaya was talking about the 5 days that Genma shared his senses with him. Kinya Kazuma thought for a while, I originally thought you wanted to see her make a fool of herself in front of everyone in the company. Amamaya shook her head, this is impossible, Kazuma, you have to understand that Gen has not stood up for many years. The endurance of people like her is completely different from mine. To be more precise, you don't need to be patient, Jianyu Kazuma said with a smile. Amamaya nodded, yes, I don't need to be patient, so I know better than anyone else that there is no way this guy Minamoto Shinzuru will lose his composure like me. She could at least hold on until the maid Minamoto Hidenori sent to supervise her sent her to the bathroom. Huh? Then why did you, hey, did you do it on purpose? Qian Yufengjian felt his scalp numb for a moment. Damn you, my Amamaya, you're going to trick Gen Zenzuru to death without even paying for it with your life. It seems that you have already figured it out. Yes, Gen Mahara is not the most vulnerable during the day, but at night. Asaba Kazuma has already figured out what Amamaya means. When he and Minamoto had a confrontation before, because Minamoto was too calm, Asahi Kazuma never connected Minamoto with a paralyzed person. But now that I think about it, before Yuan Zhenxian took the genetic modification reagent to make up for the shortcomings of his body, no matter how normal his mental state was, his body could not deceive others. That is to say, you didn't go out of your way to see Minamoto Shinzuru before you came to see me. Yuan Zhenxian blinked, what do you think? Kinya Kazuma said helplessly, that's it? Congratulations, you guessed it correctly, Amamaya said with a smile. It was only now that she showed some smiles that seemed befitting a girl of her age. Asahi Kazuma said dumbfounded, are you afraid that she won't directly share her senses with you? How do I know whether she will be willing to do it? Anyway, whether she is willing to do sensory sharing or not depends on what she thinks. If she insists on directly relying on her natural ability, then it will be none of my business if she is defeated by then. Qian Yufengjian didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Looking at Amamaya's eagerness to give it a try, how can one not understand that Amamaya deliberately wants to seduce Genzen genre? It would be fine if Minamoto no Tsurugi didn't hang up. If Genzen Xian's hands are itchy, he wants to know the secret between her and Asaba Kazuma. So sorry, what happens next has nothing to do with Amamaya. Do you think she has hooked up on sensory sharing for me, Amamyamai's right leg wearing black stockings was still gently clinging to him. Kinya Kazuma glanced at her, rolled his eyes and said, "Ask me how I know. Based on my understanding of her, if I am hard-spoken, then she has a hard-hearted heart. If you don't let her do something, the more likely she will do it. At most, it's just to hide yourself a little secretly. She has already guessed that you have some special ability that can affect her ability to adjust her talents, so it is impossible to use this ability directly on you. But she already knows that in addition to you, the person planning her plan also includes me. Of course, there is a more important point. This guy probably hangs on me for sensory sharing." Amamyamai's face showed an expression of success, and she said to herself, "I guess you are watching, Jensensen. With your character, when I provoke you in front of you, you will definitely find a way to fight back. My poor sister, you and I are different. At this time, I can stay outside with this ferocious big wolf dog, but because of your health problems, you can only go home early and go to bed after treatment. Calculate the time, you should be lying on the bed right now, and the helper should be no longer with you, eating out. That is to say, at least for this period of time, you are in a state of being isolated and helpless. It's a pity that if you attach sensory sharing to me, you can only enjoy the regular happiness. You won't have the double happiness like before." Asaba Kazuma looked at Amamyamai with a speechless expression. "You are indeed Amamyamai, who has been fighting wits with him for a long time. But, you are having such a good time, aren't you worried that Minamoto Shinjin will get really angry and settle the score with you?" As if aware of Asaba Kazuma's thoughts, Amamyamai looked at him and said, "I'm rewarding her." Kinya Kazuma coughed. He couldn't tell her that in Daxia, where he lived in his previous life, reward actually contains some special meaning. To a certain extent, Amamyamai is really rewarding Minamoto. As if she felt that she had finally provoked enough, Amamyamai hugged Asaba Kazuma affectionately and asked him to lean down. "Whether she is here or not, my main goal today still has to be achieved. My little lover, you won't let me down, right?" A subtle smile appeared at the corner of Kinya Kazuma's lips. "I even wondered if you wanted to use this method to get less punishment from me. Who knows, maybe it's just to stimulate you, maybe I really treat her as scraps." Amamyamai hugged Asaba Kazuma infatuatedly, and whispered, "The senses are shared with me, otherwise I can't bear it." Qian Yufengjian was speechless for a moment. But seeing the frightened look on his little girl's face, he finally let her share his senses honestly. It didn't matter if he didn't hang it up. Once he hung it up, he discovered that there was a looming consciousness in Amamyamai's body. That familiar feeling. It's Minamoto Shinstring. Asaba Kazuma? No, Miss Second, you are really brave. I originally thought that Amamyamai was just teasing you, and you wouldn't really do these things, but now it seems that I underestimated your audacity. The idea of sharing his senses that was implanted in Amamyamai's body flickered for a moment, and without Asaba Kazuma being able to understand it, the idea of Genma Genchuru was directly integrated into his thoughts. Asaba Kazuma? What kind of weird situation is this? Big fish eat small fish? It doesn't seem right either. He carefully felt the situation inside Amamyamai's body, and his expression gradually became subtle. He recalled the previous situation when Yuan Zhenxian attached shared perception to himself. At that time, he also attached his shared perception to Amamyamai. So, Minamoto Mizuru directly endured the happiness of Asaba Kazuma, and Amamyamai doubled. And Asaba Kazuma has gone through many rounds of love simulations to increase his attribute values, and his attribute values have far exceeded any of Minamoto Mizuru's attributes. In other words, it is also the idea of implanting sensory sharing, but his idea is far greater than that of Yuan Zhenxian. So when she was in Amamyamai's body for 2 years, her thoughts began to influence each other. In human terms, Asaba Kazuma can unilaterally transmit the happiness he feels to Minamoto's thoughts through his own thoughts. Genma Genmahara can still share Amamiyamai's senses through thoughts. Then here comes the problem. Unknown. 1. Asaba Kazuma's happiness equals his own happiness plus Mai's happiness. 2. Minamoto Mizuru's happiness equals Mai's happiness plus his unilaterally passed on the happiness of the past. Question: how much is Minamoto's happiness? Bingo. It's equal to Asaba Kazuma's happiness plus twice Mai's happiness. Woohoo, it's not a double, it's a super double. Asaba Kazuma gently stroked the ends of Amamiyamai's hair and quietly told Amamiyamai about this matter. When Amamiyamai heard this, her eyes lit up. Okay, I was just suspicious at first, but I didn't expect that my sister would really dare to do this. Then don't blame my sister for teaching you etiquette. Kazuma, come on. We've traveled through Tokyo, who still wants to simulate love? Author, Fei Se Hui-Xiang. Chapter 209. Kazuma, come on. Asaba Kazuma looked at the inexplicably excited Amamiyamai with a speechless face, and for a moment she didn't know what to complain about. Please, you reacted so strongly, you thought I was looking for someone else. I'm here to watch a show. Kinyo Kazuma has evil intentions. He climbed up and held Amamiyamai's face. Amamiyamai struggled and turned her face to the side. Chienyu Kazuma was amused. I thought that this guy really put all his energy on Genzinsen. The relationship was just right now, and then he started to feel shy. How could he forget that the eldest lady is soft all over, but she has a stubborn mouth? Kinyo Kazuma leaned down and said, "Don't worry about her, look at me." After Amamiyamai paused for a moment, she finally turned her gaze to Asaba Kazuma. The moment their eyes met, Amamiyamai's face began to turn red, and she said reluctantly, "Watch what I do, do the job you're supposed to do." The eldest lady's tone is still as harsh as ever. I just don't know if in practice I can be as harsh as you are now. Asaba Kazuma knew Amamiyamai's character, but she couldn't help but provoke her a few more times. Amamiyamai pursed her lips and didn't say much. She just closed her eyes slightly and prepared to let Asaba Kazuma act on her own. Anyway, I am just a little bitch. If you are weak, you will be weak. Anyway, I am not the one who consumes the most energy. Amamiyamai couldn't help but think. But what happened next was beyond Amamiyamai's expectation. Kinyo Kazuma gently touched her face and said, "I just hope our eldest lady can stop begging for mercy in the future." Amamiya coughed. Beg for mercy? What begging for mercy? What if you are talking about the ridiculous 5 days before, when you pretended to be an idol star who was obsessed with an underground lover, and then cried and shouted on the sofa, "You can't do this to me." Of course it's acting. Or maybe she was pretending to be a maiden who had run away from home, eating the bread she had just bought, but it was so bumpy that it was difficult to swallow, so that her initial cry of "I can do anything for the money" was distorted into "Please be gentle with me." Yes, this is still acting. What? You said that she pretended to be a literary girl, was attracted to Asaba Kazuma in the sadness of spring and autumn, fell in love, and then, after giving everything, she begged, "Don't dirty my books" on the balcony of her favorite room where she likes to read. As I said, don't ask, it's just about acting. Why mention it again? She pretended to be a college student with huge debts and both parents died, and shamefully asked him to let her go in Asaba Kazuma's studio. I said it, acting. Acting. It's all about acting. As for why every role you play is begging for mercy at the end? Don't ask, I'll beat you to death. So there are no surprises. Not long after, the little boy fell down again. Qian Yufengjian laughed and cried. If I had known this, why bother? If you want to target Minamoto, you need to go to so much trouble, torturing yourself and others in such a roundabout way. Asaba Kazuma began to wonder if Mai was obsessed with certain things because of the unbearable past between him and her. After everything was over, Asaba Kazuma hugged the defeated Amamiya Mai and said helplessly, "There's no need to hold on if you can't bear it." Amamiya Mai's rapid breathing gradually became calmer. Looking at Asaba Kazuma, she rolled her eyes and said, "Isn't this just for us to be safer? My good sister is not a simple person. If you don't leave a few hands to prepare, it will be more troublesome when you really want to touch her." As Amamiya Mai spoke, she stretched out her hands towards Asaba Kazuma. "Hug me. Go to the bathroom. Well, let's wash it faster. If you really want to continue, you'd better find a way to wash it faster. I'm in a hurry to get home. Waiting to go back and watch Minamoto's jokes, right? Hee, can't you? She is lying on the bed now. She can't even get out of the bed without help from outsiders, let alone destroy the evidence of the defeat on the bed." Kinya Kazuma smashed his mouth. Although I had already guessed that Amamiya Mai was beginning to like this kind of operation of using non-frontal confrontation to deceive others, I didn't expect that she would actually play a trick that could not be broadcast at all. This time Asaba Kazuma didn't last long in the bathroom. To be more precise, there was no dedication at all. The main reason was that he was in a hurry to send Amamiya Mai back to Genji. After all, if he goes back too late, it is not impossible for Genma Geniki to be ruthless and find a way to completely destroy the evidence. So until Amamiya Mai cleaned herself up, he maintained her state and took no further action. As for what status? The kind of state that can keep Minamoto Shinzuru in a state of dehydration. Mai Amamiya left the temporary nest U2 built and returned to the Minamoto clan. The land of the Minamoto clan is some distance away from the land of the old Minamoto clan. It is now where the main family of the Minamoto family and the branch family live. As the eldest lady of the Genji family who has not yet been exposed, Amamiya Mai at least has more freedom of movement. No one will stop Amamiya Mai from going out or returning home. Similarly, when Amamiya Mai goes to see Gen, there will be no servants to stop her. You saw the maid who stayed behind to look after Minamoto Shinzen outside Minamoto's room, and told her that you were going to see Minamoto Shinzen. The maid couldn't stop Amamiya Mai, so she went to Genma's door, knocked on the door and informed her of the incident. Minamoto Shinzen hesitated for a moment, and finally allowed Amamiya Mai to enter her room. In the simulation space, Asaba Kazuma looked at these lines of text while holding back a smile. He couldn't imagine how devastated Genzen would be when he heard that Amamiya Mai was about to enter her room. It's like a two-dimensional person who made several pillows with his wife's paper character printed on them at home. In the past, when parents, brothers, sisters, and even relatives and friends saw them, they would be embarrassed at most. But one day, my mother suddenly felt a strong desire to clean your paper man wife pillow, and then directly hung the paper man pillow on the balcony to bask in the sun. Then suddenly your classmate passed by, pointed at the pillow and laughed and said, "Haha, look, XXX actually bought such a pillow." At this moment, you suddenly felt a strong urge to kill someone. Before you could recover, you suddenly discovered that the child you hated most, your lifelong enemy in school, also saw the paper pillowcase hanging on the balcony to dry. At this moment, I was thinking of escaping from the blue star at the speed of light. But it feels like it should be fun. Asaba Kazuma Nojo showed an interested expression. He continues to turn his attention to dating simulation content. The scene unfolds. This time, he unfolds a scene from a third-person perspective. The protagonist of the scene is naturally not Asaba Kazuma. Instead, they walked into Amamiya Mai, who was in Genma's bedroom, and Genma, who was covering the bed with a quilt, as if he was half asleep and half awake. "You go out first, I have something to talk to her about." Gensien looked at the maid. The maid nodded, turned around, walked out and closed the door. Amamiya Mai turned around and walked towards the door, locking the door directly. When she looked at Minamoto, she had an almost unbridled smile on her face. My good sister, you have personally experienced how I feel. How does it feel? I see that the blush on your face has not gone away. You can't be so fragile and be defeated easily by sharing your senses, right? But don't do this. I want to see my lovely sister struggle a little more in this situation. Genzen Xian smiled coldly, my good sister, thank you for your willingness to let me experience the feelings you have with Asaba Kazuma, so that I can be taught a lesson. But for now, my good sister, your fighting ability doesn't seem to be very good. Can you really satisfy that beast with your little body? Amamiyamai did not refute her, but just walked forward. Brush it? Yuan Zhengxian's weak body was unable to stop her from lifting her quilt. Amamiyamai looked at the wet bed and chuckled a few times, it's more exaggerated than me. It looks like you are happier than I imagined. Although Yuan Zhengxian had already expected such an ending, he still covered his face in pain, not wanting to look at this person. It was already expected when she was let in. Just like Amamiyamai understands her very well, Minamoto Mizuru also understands the character of his cheap sister very well. Humility. As an opponent who is her enemy, she has no idea of being humble at all. It was precisely this resolute character that made the young members of the Genji family who were eager to further expand the coverage of the Genji group actively choose to side with her. But, sure enough, the shame caused by such a gaffe being exposed in front of her is still too great. Yuan Zhengxian sighed slightly in his heart, took a few deep breaths, and finally adjusted his state. Her eyes that were originally red from embarrassment gradually became calmer. She looked at Amamiyamai calmly and said, do you need me to provide you with a mobile phone to take photos? No, 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 I have no idea of using your second-hand goods. I have a better way. Amamiyamai took out a Polaroid camera from her bag, clicked it, and took a picture of Genmagen's bed that had turned into a water bed, and Gengen's cold smile. Come down. Tisk, tisk, it's really good. It's much more interesting than I thought. My good sister, I really didn't expect you to be so calm. Genzen Xian looked at her calmly and said, the purpose of letting you in is to allow you to obtain evidence that can threaten me. If there is nothing that can threaten me, you must not feel comfortable cooperating with me. That's true, but I didn't expect that you would be willing to pay such a high price. Aren't you afraid that I would show these photos to others? Yuan Zhengxian sneered. Give it to someone else? Whoever you can give it to, there is a high probability that you will keep it for yourself, and the remaining probability will be given to Kinha Kazuma. My Amamiya, you have stayed in Genji for too long. It is impossible for an environment like ours to produce allies who trust each other. Everyone is our potential enemy. To a certain extent, you, who are competing with each other for the position of head of the Genji family, are more trustworthy than that group of people. Amamiyamai also showed a subtle expression. I originally thought that you would at least have a helper that I would trust, but now it seems that the helper is the one with the biggest problem. She is the person sent by Yuan Xiudian to monitor me. That woman hides very well and rarely reveals her true identity. Of course, the most important thing is, perhaps in the heart of my good grandpa, I pose a greater threat to him. Amamiyamai chuckled, so you would rather let me see your ugliness than have your affairs fall into the hands of Minamoto Hidenori's group of people. As Amamiyamai said this, she approached Genma Genzuru with a smile. My good sister, I have been curious before. If you are sitting in a wheelchair and cannot stand up normally, you will be easily bullied without the protection of others. It's no wonder that you have always maintained an expression of keeping strangers away. My dear sister, you are actually afraid of exposing your weakness. Because once you lose Genji's protection, in your situation, you won't even be able to protect yourself. For example, if I go first, even if I pin you down and beat you up, I'm afraid you won't be able to resist. Yuan Zhengxian's face turned blue and white, and finally said suddenly. Why do you have to humiliate me like this? Amamaya Mai looked at her confused. Amamaya Mai responded with a pair of angry eyes. Hey, how can Amamaya Mai still endure this? She has an absolute advantage. In this case, the only one who will play the role of a spoiled child is Minamoto Shinzuru. She took off her shoes and climbed onto the wet water bed. Yuan Zhenxian, who had no reaction at first, suddenly started struggling. But it's of no use. Amamaya Mai's body was already much better than that of ordinary people, and now she was occupying a high ground, directly suppressing Minamoto Shin's string and unable to move. Along with the clicking sounds of Polaroid cameras, pieces of evidence were preserved by Mai Amamaya. Zhen Zhen wanted to cry out for help, but Amamaya Mai blocked her with a handkerchief. Just as Amamaya Mai was enjoying the joy of victory proudly, she suddenly heard her cell phone ringing. Amamaya Mai picked it up and saw that it was Asaba Kazuma. She frowned. If it were anyone else, she might just ignore it. But the person calling was Asahi Kazuma, so she still had to answer the call. As soon as the call was connected, she heard Qian Yufengjian's helpless and speechless voice. What are you doing? It was rare for Amamaya Mai to understand for a moment what Asaba Kazuma wanted to express. So Kinyo Kazuma said something again. Have you forgotten that my sensory sharing has not been cancelled? Amamaya Mai, huh? Soon she seemed to understand what Minamoto meant by humiliating her. She put down her phone in embarrassment and took out the handkerchief from Minamoto's mouth. Do you really want to fight to the death? Zhen Xian said coldly. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. We've traveled through Tokyo, who still wants to simulate love? Author, Fei Se Hui-Xiang. Chapter 210. Minamoto's eyes were full of anger. If she wasn't really unwilling to let her handle fall into the hands of people on Minamoto Hideno's side, how could she let Amamaya Mai come in? I just didn't expect that this cheap sister not only had no martial ethics, but even brought an outsider with her to humiliate her. That's right, Zhen Zhen directly regarded the situation where Asaba Kazuma's thoughts were still hanging on Amamaya Mai's body as if the two of them were working together to target her. Have you had enough? Come down when you have enough. Looking at Amamaya Mai, who was pressing her down on the bed unable to move, she said coldly. Amamaya Mai knew she was in the wrong. Getting off her a little embarrassed. But how to say it? My Amamaya has a really tough mouth. Actually, I didn't ask him to cancel the sensory sharing because I was worried that you might act recklessly and do something wrong in the process. I didn't want to humiliate you. Actually, I simply forgot that there is such a thing. Zhen Zhengxuan's face darkened. Do you think I look like a fool? Amamaya Mai coughed, feeling a little embarrassed for a moment. Fortunately, she had the willpower to hold it down. Let me help you destroy the evidence. Amamaya Mai said seriously. Yuan Zhenxian snorted coldly, turned his head and said through gritted teeth. How can you help? He still has sensory sharing turned on. Amamaya Mai. Amamaya Mai, oh no, I forgot. He is not nearby now, so I can't even cancel the sensory sharing. Minamoto Shinjin stared at Amamaya Mai with murderous intent flashing in his eyes. You actually did it on purpose. Amamaya Mai shook her head. I really didn't mean it, I really forgot, so why don't you wait a minute and I'll go find him. Yuan Zhenxian felt as if his head was about to explode with anger. Inexplicably, she thought of what happened before Amamaya Mai came to her. She admitted that she did underestimate this unprecedented impact. So much so, that her mind went completely blank at the time, and things like finding a way to seek help were completely forgotten. The unprecedented feeling of being alive, mixed with happiness, eventually turned into an indescribable shock. So, She didn't know when she quietly gave up thinking in her brain and let this feeling spread to every corner of her body. When I came back to my senses, it was already too late. For a moment, she didn't feel so angry. After all, Asaba Kazuma is really gentle when treating Amamiyamai, and he can feel what Amamiyamai likes and what she doesn't like. This operation directly maximized Amamiyamai's experience. So much so that Amamiyamai herself has some. I'm a bit embarrassed to say that. In short, in those 5 days, Amamiyamai really didn't necessarily want to take revenge on Minamoto. After all, Minamoto himself missed those days quite a bit. Certainly. It was impossible for Minamoto Shinzuru to say such a thing directly. My brain almost shut down because of that incident between the couple. Impossible, absolutely impossible. But now, seeing Amamiyamai's hesitant and embarrassed expression, although she still couldn't figure out whether this bastard did it on purpose or if he really forgot, she finally sighed. Minamoto Shinzuru, can you do it while blindfolding yourself? Amamiyamai, you are making things difficult for me. Genzen-sien, this is the mess you caused. Don't forget that we are still in alliance now. Amamiyamai, can I unilaterally cancel the alliance now? Yuen Zhensien. Amamiyamai, I was just joking, why are you still angry? Minamoto no fucks said. Now she really wished that she was a healthy person, so that she could stand up and smash this bastard's head off. Amamiyamai saw Minamoto's face getting worse and worse, and smiled helplessly. You and I have been hostile to each other for a long time, so I don't bother to talk about you anymore. She lowered her voice slightly and said, there should be someone making some small moves outside the door. Are you really not afraid of being discovered by the guys outside? Genzen looked at Amamiyamai with some embarrassment. It took her a few seconds to calm down her emotions. She said coldly, just do what you want to do, and I will try my best to cooperate with you this time. When she heard Amamiyamai's reminder, she roughly guessed who was outside the door. Most likely it was her good helper. Genzen is a vigilant person, and he has hardly trusted anyone for such a long time. In the past, the maid who had taken care of her since childhood was barely considered one. But it turned out that she was wrong. That was one day when she suddenly had a high fever and was sent to Genji Medical Institution for treatment. After that treatment, she felt some changes in her body. At that time, she didn't understand what it was all about. She just heard from her family that she had become an extremely rare void gene awakener. Later, she understood what the void gene was and successfully used the power of acceleration of thinking after awakening. But she, who has always been smart, soon felt something was wrong. Because she discovered that she was different from most of the void gene owners recorded in her family. She seems to have two different talents. Being in Genji, no matter how well her family protected her, Genji still received the orthodox education of Genji. In such an elite education, it is impossible to lack things like conspiracy and calculation. So without any surprise, she buried the ability of sensory sharing in her heart, leaving only the accelerated thinking to show to her family. Because the mysteries of the genetic field are so great, the people at Genji Medical did not have as deep an understanding of adjusting genes as they do today. As one of the candidates for the patriarch of the Genji family, Minamoto Shinzuru naturally needs to hide his information. So she and Amamiyamai worked together to hide their adjustment genes. After so many years, no one knew that she had this talent except for Amamiyamai and Asaba Kazuma, who got the information about her genetic adjustment from unknown sources. Including, the maid she once trusted so much. Later, she would often inject the idea of her shared senses into animals like birds at the window. Turn out. Sure enough, it's better not to share the senses of animals. But if it were implanted into a human body, even Genzen, who was still ignorant at the time, would feel strongly awkward. Especially men. She has no interest in it, and no need to feel the man's feelings. What if something like that happens? She felt like she could go crazy. So of course she set her sights on the maid who took care of her all year round. She used to really trust her. It can even be said that because of her existence, Yuan Zhenxian has not experienced despair for a long time. It's good to have someone to rely on. It's a pity that such a person turned out to be the internal agent sent by Minamoto Hideyori to supervise Minamoto Mizuru. She discovered this accidentally. At that time, she had just turned on her talent for adjustment and was extremely yearning for the outside world. Then after some experiments, she realized that she could never share her senses with animals, so she linked her senses sharing with the maid. Once. Twice. 3 times. Yuan Zhenxian didn't notice any problems at first. Until the 4th time. That day, after taking care of herself, the maid had to leave temporarily for a while. At that time, she used the shared senses without even thinking about it. Then, she saw the maid coming to an old man whom she had always been a little afraid of, and truthfully informed Minamoto Shinzuru of his recent situation. At that moment, Yuan Zhenxian's heart became cold. She never expected that the maid who had been taking care of her would be someone from Minamoto Hideyori. It's not quite right to call it internal. It should be said that this stupid woman didn't realize what she was doing. In her eyes, Genji seemed to be a complete individual. Therefore, it doesn't matter even if Minamoto Hideyori knows about Minamoto Mizuru's situation. This made Yuan Zhenxian a little unable to start. If the maid really sided with Minamoto Hideyori and betrayed her like this, I'm afraid Minamoto would find an opportunity to take her life away directly. But she is not. Her attitude towards Yuan Zhenxian is quite sincere, and she does like herself. But her threat to Yuan Zhenxian is also real, and Yuan Zhenxian cannot tolerate it. In the end, Minamoto Shinzan might be tired, or maybe he just wanted to show off, so he let this person stay with him. Did she regret it later? She thought maybe there was. After all, leaving this person behind means that there is an extra pair of eyes around him that pay attention to him. This feeling of being noticed is not pleasant. But if she really had to leave, there would be few people she could talk to in the huge Genji. But she also became more and more silent. The spirit also became highly tense. Sometimes I am woken up in my sleep. Gradually, her temper became more and more violent. She figured it out. People like maids should not be replaced. After all, she had already exposed her bottom, and she was already on guard. But if she changes to a new helper, how can she guarantee that this helper is not from Yuan Shinori's side? In the end, it wasn't a bad debt. Later, Gen looked at Amamiyamai with a somewhat complicated expression. Amamiyamai was a little confused. Why are you looking at me like this? Do you need me to take you to take a good bath? The corner of Yuan Zhenxian's mouth twitched slightly. She didn't really want to admit it, but she actually envied Amamiyamai. I envy her for being able to move freely, and envy her for not knowing what that mad dog Minamoto Hideyori is doing. I envy her that she can act like a real young lady and scold Fang Qiu. She didn't know when she started to attach her shared senses to Amamiyamai. Since you can't go out, find someone you don't find so annoying to use as your half. Let her do what she can't do for herself. It can be said that it was an extremely enjoyable time for her. The position of the head of the Genji family, with the concealment of Genzan's adjustment talent, can be directly dealt with. As long as she makes some fine adjustments according to the strategy that Amamiyamai has set for the Genji subsidiary, she can completely borrow the power of the Hatoyama family to greatly reduce the implementation of the subsidiary's strategy. If the layout is better, it is normal to fall directly. But she didn't want this. She likes to see Amamiyamai lose to herself in a daze without even understanding the situation, and then she doesn't give in and jumps around. He even enjoyed her twitching but cute face when she met him and was provoked by his words. This will give her a subtle alive feeling in addition to pleasure. For this reason, over the years, Minamoto Shinzuru had the opportunity to completely defeat Amamiya Mai, but every time she would leave some way for Amamiya Mai to break the situation. And her sister is indeed extremely smart. Even if she doesn't have an intelligence advantage, she can quickly avert danger. And this guy adapts very quickly, and it doesn't take long to reorganize the company's development opportunities. For her own little selfishness, she has carefully maintained the dynamic balance between the two of them over the years. Well, this was more or less an accident. To put it simply, the boss and the second boss fight against each other, and the third, fourth, fifth, and other people in the back are all wiped out. So much so that the two of them had not been competing against each other for more than 2 years. Others who had had a slight chance to participate in the competition for the head of the family simply chose to withdraw from the battlefield. Perhaps because she had been watching Amamiya Mai for so many years, she had the illusion that Amamiya Mai was toying with her applause, so that she let her guard down a bit. Unconsciously, she seemed to feel the aftermath of the battle between Amamiya Mai and Asaba Kazuma. In a daze, Genzen Minamoto recalled the feeling of Amamiya Mai's legs going weak. It was as if her legs were really half weak. This illusion of shared senses made her subconsciously touch her legs. The cramp-like tangle, pain, and indescribable joy in my legs seemed to still remain. Suddenly, Yuan Jingxuan's pupils shrank suddenly. Your feet seem to be lifted a little. Genzen Xian spent all his energy to suppress the expression on his face. She tried again to recall the feeling of weak legs. But this time, she didn't feel it anymore. She felt like she was going crazy. There is none left? Why is it gone? No. I must have that feeling. I have to stand up. No matter what method is used, I will stand up. I've had enough of this life. Yuan Zhenxian confirmed his thoughts in an instant, raised his head, showed a charming smile, and said with a smile. It doesn't matter. I've already experienced it once, so it's not clean anymore. If I'm seen by him again. There was a tangled expression on her face. Minamoto, this may be your only chance in this life. Then she smiled even brighter. So I asked my good sister to help me take care of the problem. Amamiya Mai, can you stop smiling like that? It looks so disgusting. Minamoto's expression froze. After a moment, she suppressed her annoyance and said, okay, come here and help. Tisk, is this the attitude of begging for help? But Amamiya Mai still went over to help her. We've traveled through Tokyo, who still wants to simulate love? Author, Fei Se Hui-Xiang. Chapter 211. Mai Amamiya helped Minamoto Mizuru clean herself up. This is probably the first time that these two unrelated sisters have been so close in so many years. After Amamiya Mai washed Minamoto Mizuru, she directly put her wet body on the bed. This is the outrageous operation Amamiya Mai came up with. After she changed clothes for Minamoto, she asked the maid to come in and clean up the scene. She told the maid that she would still need to ask the maid to help her take a bath next time. She claimed that just giving her a change of clothes was so frustrating that she had to be taken out of the bathroom and thrown on the bed, then wiped and changed. This experience seems quite outrageous, and the maid also looks dubious. However, seeing that Amamiya Mai's face looked very ugly and half of her body was wet with water, I could only believe it. When she walked into the room and saw water stains everywhere on the floor, she nodded, what she said should be true. When the maid first started taking care of Minamoto Mizuru's body, she was also in such a mess. It's just that the maid is a little confused. In the past, Amamiya Mai and Genma wished they could never have any contact with each other. Why is the relationship suddenly getting better now? Seeing this scene, Minamoto Shinzen finally felt a little at ease. Not long after, she received a call from you. You were going to tell her. GGG, Miss ER's taste is really good, Do you want to try it when you have time to see the real taste? It's a pleasure to work with you, but I have to say that the quality of the skin is good, it's a feast for the eyes. A bit too thin, I will feel guilty, so don't come here next time. Free simulation. Asaba Kazuma. Sigma. This. I remember I didn't open the fall line. Why does this happen? The first is option. The elder of the Soul Palace rejected it without even looking at it? Do you really think it's Xiao Yan's script from the Soul Palace? Dama. It is impossible to click on this option. Option, I don't know why it feels so greasy. However, this is true. Minamoto's body really didn't look like that of a sickly girl. It's just, very embarrassing. Option 3, Asahi Kazuma couldn't say anything anymore. After all, although Minamoto Shinzen doesn't look like a patient, his thin body is obvious. Not to mention that when Amama Yamai was cleaning Genma, she still had Asaba Kazuma's sensory sharing hanging on her body. Ahem. No wonder Minamoto Shinzen was so angry before. If someone else encountered the situation, they would probably go crazy. I can only watch others move their hands and feet quietly, but I have no ability to resist. Even more, one's own feelings have to be conveyed to another person, so that others can experience the taste of Minamoto Shinzen. If Asaba Kazuma encountered such a situation, he would probably become even more excited. But, no, it will become incompetent and furious. It can only be said that Genzen Xian is really tolerant. Thin and small, but definitely not without material. What does this option have to do with Amama Yamai? In his impression, only the eldest lady Amama Yamai could be so harsh-spoken. I was obviously very happy when I was in the bathroom. After thinking for a moment, Asaba Kazuma finally made a choice between options 2 and 3. Sure enough, it's still option 3. He didn't want to get too involved with Yuan Zhenxian. Although from the unfolding of the love simulation scene, he had somewhat understood Minamoto's mentality, and he also had other understandings of her. But how do you say that? I agree with your actions, but that doesn't mean I forgive your mistakes. Asaba Kazuma can somewhat understand Minamoto's mentality. Because of his physical problems, this guy has been tortured mentally for so many years and is somewhat abnormal. Now, it can be said that Yuan Zhenxian lives entirely for himself. If it can make herself happy, then even if it leaves a glimmer of hope for Amama Yamai and allows her to become stronger and stronger through repeated struggles, she is willing to do such things to benefit the enemy. If you feel unhappy, you will try your best to eliminate the source of the unhappiness. For example, after knowing that Kaguya is the source of her pain, her first thought is to kill her directly. For example, if she hates Minamoto Hidnori, she will directly find a way to lead Minamoto Hidnori onto the path of destruction. In the love simulation, she used this method to lure herself and Mai into the pit of Genji. In the end, in order to ensure his own safety, Asaba Kazuma took matters into his own hands and sent Minamoto Hidnori on the road. Among them, Yuan Zhenxian, who did not participate in the conflict between the two parties but ultimately gained a lot of benefits from these things, is most likely the traitor. It can be said that despite the fact that Genzen Xian screams and screams all day long, she somewhat smells like a bitch, but in fact she is not as incompetent as a bitch. It's really easy to fall into a trap if you despise her. Choose 3 options. You dialed Minamoto's phone number. The person on the other end of the phone was short of breath, and Minamoto's breathing couldn't calm down for a long time. For a long time, you waited until Yuan Zhenxian's mood gradually calmed down, and then you opened your mouth to speak. The scene unfolds. Asahi Kazuma noticed that Minamoto's slightly annoyed voice was gradually lowering, and then he said, "She really didn't mean it. It was mainly because we had an accident here." Yuan Zhenxian snorted coldly, grabbed the phone and said, "How do I know if it was intentional? Anyway, You have already experienced what you should feel and what you shouldn't feel. Kinyo Kazuma sneered and said. Don't kidnap me with words like this. I don't have much morals. This trick won't work for me. Oh, it doesn't matter. Anyway, I will remember this incident. I will find an opportunity to take revenge. Asahi Kazuma clearly didn't see Minamoto's face, but it was as if he heard a hint of provocation in the voice. Qian Yufengma grinned and said with a smile. How can I get revenge? I'll show you when you come over. Zhen Zhengxian's face froze on the other end of the phone. Asahi Kazuma is really a jerk. But soon Yuan Zhenxian remembered what he should do. Those legs that had no feeling were a lifelong pain for Minamoto. In order to be able to stand up, she doesn't mind doing a few tricks. So she said with a smile. No, I have to find a way to peek into my good sister's life. After all, I'm just a poor little girl who can't get up. I can only use my sense-sharing ability to feel the body of a normal person. Of course, if you accidentally come across some secret information and accidentally affect Amamiyamai, who manages these industries, there is nothing you can do. These words are more or less provocative. It was like openly shouting to Asaba Kazuma, or it seemed like a provocation to Asaba Kazuma. Chienyu Kazuma raised her eyebrows subconsciously after hearing what she said. Interesting, it seems like you haven't been beaten yet. But why do I hear it, as if my dear Miss Gen Mahara wants me to continue the previous operation? Zhen Zhengxian's eyelids jumped. How come this guy seems to have guessed what she wants to do? Before Zhen Zhenzhen could reply, Asaba Kazuma said. Of course, I have no interest in making you feel what happened between me and Amamiyamai. Asahi Kazuma said without hesitation. The easiest way to make Minamoto know way to start is to never confront her head-on. In a game with someone like Minamoto Shinzuru, you only need to ignore her to make her surrender. Of course, the prerequisite for this kind of game to be successful is that Asahi Kazuma knows what she wants. Unfortunately, Minamoto's weakness was taken advantage of by Asaba Kazuma. Without any surprise, Yuan Zhenxian said directly, please help me, just tell me what you want to do. If you had the guts to come over and listen to this, you might not understand what Zhen Zhenxian wanted to express at all. But Asahi Kazuma understood. Zhen Zhenxian hopes that he can help her. As long as he can help her stand up, no matter what Asaba Kazuma hopes to achieve, Minamoto Masaka will do his best to help him. Yuan Zhenxian would not be stupid enough to think that the reaction in his feet really had something to do with, and that embarrassing thing. This is an insult to modern medicine. After Minamoto Zayashi became the head of the Genji family, he spent a lot of resources investigating the condition of Minamoto's body. What she ended up with was really disappointing. She couldn't stand up. It was not so much a problem with her steps as it was a brain lesion after activating the adjustment gene. It may be that adjusting genes places too great a burden on the body. It may also be that some pathological changes occurred during the awakening process of the adjustment gene that Minamoto Shinzuru cannot understand. But no matter which one it is, one thing is certain. That's what paralyzed her, from tweaking her genes. In today's world, there are very few conditions that are almost impossible to detect even through examination. Among them, due to the existence of adjusted genes, a number of unexplained special diseases have been born in various countries around the world. The side effect of Minamoto Shinjin's inability to stand up is actually considered acceptable among these illnesses. It can be said that the best way to solve her problems is to invest huge sums of money to solve the many difficult problems of genetic adjustment. She believes that as long as she can make enough breakthroughs in the field of genetic adjustment, she will be able to stand up again in her lifetime. Living under the sun like a normal person. Solve the difficult problem of adjusting genes equals hope to stand up. And now a strange thing has been discovered. When Minamoto Shinzuru felt the consciousness of Asaba Kazuma wrapping her own thoughts, she seemed to feel a vast lake of your thoughts. In this lake, Her mental power was activated like never before, and her brain, which originally seemed to be running very fast, seemed to have invisibly exceeded some upper limit. The nerve reflexes that were originally blocked seemed to have some fluctuations in this one. Therefore, Yuan Zhenxian can be sure that the real cause of this phenomenon cannot be that kind of extremely shameful thing. The feeling that she could finally feel the torso smoothly drove her crazy. But she didn't even have time to feel that feeling. Thinking of this, her eyes turned red. Help me. Face. What face? From today on, she, Yuan Zhenxian, has no face. After all, Yuan Zhenxian didn't care. But whether you can stand up or not is very important. Your sense sharing seems to be completely different from mine. Kinyu Kazuma coughed. He didn't say much. Because he probably guessed why this happened. In Mai's love simulation, he once solved the mystery of Minamoto's paralysis. In other words, situations like Minamoto's situation are relatively common among some adjusters. The root cause of this situation lies in the compatibility between the adjusted gene and the body, and the burden of adjusting the gene itself is too great for the adjuster's body to bear. To put it simply, the operation of her brain has taken up too much computing power in order to maintain the activation of adjustment genes, so that the control of her body, which was not a heavy burden on the brain, has declined significantly. Adjusting genes is not the kind of superpower without roots. Some of the things needed to activate the adjusting genes need to be provided by the adjusters themselves. But not every adjuster has this ability. For those whose physical fitness is not up to standard, adjusting genes is a huge burden. That's why gene adjustment reagents are needed to buffer against the pressure of adjusting genes. Unfortunately, at the current point of time, it is extremely difficult to configure qualified adjustment genes. In Amamiya Mai's love simulation, Minamoto Mizuru and Amamiya Mai fought with each other. It was not until the middle stage of the two people's fight for the head of the Genji family that Minamoto Mizuru actually obtained her exclusive genetic adjustment reagent. As for the current time period, we have to wait another year or so before the most basic instruments are available that can meet the needs of adjusting the configuration of genes. However, this does not mean that there is no solution to the problem of Yuan Zhenxian at this stage. Because Asaba Kazuma knows the final answer to Minamoto's problem. It's just that he doesn't agree with it. Yes, that antidote is Asaba Kazuma himself. In other words, it is the genetic crown flowing in Kinha Kazuma's body. Kinyu Kazuma raised his head and glanced at her. Although the secret of the gene crown is not a secret among Rina, Kian, and Mai. But it's different here. She is not a trustworthy person, not even an ally. So it was impossible for him to tell her the optimal solution. Asahi Kazuma also needs to think more about helping her solve the problem. So he said, let's wait for this matter. I really have no interest in doing these things, let alone experiencing Mai's feelings when she treats you. Kinyu Kazuma coughed, besides, you are a bit too thin and you will feel guilty. Don't come next time. Yuan Zhenxian? If she heard correctly, she seemed to be disliked. We've traveled through Tokyo, who still wants to simulate love? Author, Fei Se Huixiang. Chapter 212. If she heard correctly, she seemed to be disliked. Yuan Zhenxian's expression gradually became stiff. Okay. Very good. This is the first time in so many years that someone has attacked Yuan Zhenxian's self-confidence from this angle. You know, even though she has been unable to stand up for so many years, and even some people in the Genji family secretly mocked her as a princess who cannot stand on her feet, she has never questioned her beauty. Even, because of her own special problems, she even has extra bonuses when facing certain people. There are always people who like this kind of innocent-looking sick girl. Are you saying that I, Minamoto Shinzuru, am not naive? What does that have to do with me? When I say I am naive, that means I am naive. She likes to unintentionally reveal her weak posture in front of many people, and uses this look that makes people fall in love to win the sympathy of many people, thereby gaining a potential advantage. As a result, now that Asaba Kazuma is here, he has received this evaluation. Simply. He was just deliberately provoking her. Decided. Be sure to write this guy Asaba Kazuma down in your notebook. Whenever you get a chance, you must let him see it. Yuan Zhenxian paused for a moment, with a look of horror on his face. Why would she have such an idea? She didn't remember that the relationship between herself and Asahi Kazuma was so good. There was even a vaguely hostile relationship between him and himself. Zhen Xian could feel the emotions coming from him, although she couldn't understand why Asahi Kazuma was so hostile to her. Just like. It was as if she had discovered very early on that she was not compatible with him. This subtle feeling more or less aroused some curiosity in her. Of course, this is not the most important thing. The most important thing is that Minamoto discovered that he was really affected by sensory sharing. Is there anything else? It's okay, I'll hang up. Zhen opened his mouth, and just as he was about to say something, Asaba Kazuma had already hung up the phone. After hanging up the phone, Minamoto became even more angry. It was a really bad day. She couldn't help but think of this while lying on the bed. But not long after, a trace of confusion flashed across her face. She could probably understand why she was like this. In the final analysis, it is because the ability of sensory sharing directly affects Minamoto's cognition. As for the reason, it's very simple. For humans, the relevant elements that constitute memory are all obtained through the senses. Zhen has directly shared the senses of animals, maids, and Amamayamai through sensory sharing over the years, which will have some impact on her. The most typical one is animals. Why would she now reject sensory sharing with animals? On the one hand, it's because an animal's senses are really weird and can easily affect her human instincts. On the other hand, for animals, the steel jungle of Tokyo is too dangerous. Have you ever experienced the feeling of covering a bird with sensory sharing, and then not long after, the bird was shot down by a child with a slingshot? The severe pain of having his wings broken, the impact of falling from high altitude to the ground, and the fear of dying, deeply made Zhen realize that covering sensory sharing on creatures other than the terrifying upright ape is simply risking his life. That day, she was sent directly to the medical facility at home because of unprecedented pain. However, after some inspections, no one found anything wrong with themselves, and finally turned their attention to genetic modification. After all, for some medical personnel within Genji, if the cause of the problem cannot be found at all, the patient or the adjuster can directly attribute the problem to the adjusted gene. Of course, in fact, this problem is indeed caused by adjusting genes. This incident ended up being nothing, and it left a heavy psychological shadow on Zhen. But at the same time, she also realized something. That is, my adjustment talent sensory sharing is actually a very risky talent. It is true that this talent allows her to easily complete certain tasks such as investigating intelligence, but during the 5 days of sensory sharing, if the sharer is not with her, it means that she will absorb up to 5 days of additional information. The kind that cannot be interrupted. And because she shares her senses instead of dominating others' senses, if she is dominating the senses, she can also actively control the other person to avoid risks. But shared senses cannot do that. So for such a long time, Minamoto Shinzuru's favorite thing to do is to share her senses with Amamayamai. Others don't know the secret of adjusting genes hidden by Amamayamai, how could she not know? After all, when Amamayamai turned on the adjustment talent overclocking mode, she often enjoyed a wave of power training operations through sensory sharing. At this time, in simulation space, Asahi Kazuma's expression twitched with laughter. He decided to find a timeline to talk to Amamayamai about this matter. He had heard Amamyamai mention it before that although Minamoto Mizurui had never gone to school, he had only attached his name to a certain private school. Even when I didn't study much, I could get top marks every year when I took the final exam. A girl with a face that almost no one has ever seen, a name that no student knows, a mysterious girl who appears on the teacher's roll call but has no place in the classroom. It is said that because Jensensen conceals his own operations, he has almost become a mysterious legend in the school. After all, it's quite scary to think about. I have never seen this person in school, but I see her name everywhere. It would be strange if this kind of thing is not a strange thing. I just didn't expect that Minamoto Shinzen would actually put his adjustment talent to use. Really are. Using Amamyamai as a AFK player, what's the difference between that and AFK? Amamyamai's overclocking mode can be said to be the most powerful talent he has ever seen, with the highest lower limit and the highest upper limit. It was only later that Asaba Kazuma realized how terrifying the talents of the heroines who appeared in the love simulation were. Rina Ishihara's sensitivity in shaping and coloring is as if she was born to be an adjuster. He didn't understand the outrageous styling until after the Heian simulation line and absorbing the genetic code. On the one hand, Rina's sensitivity to modeling gave her an innate ability to perceive space, a talent necessary for interstellar voyages and the basis for being a cosmic being. On the other hand, body shaping includes body shaping. In short, a body that looks extremely pleasing to the eye and full of beauty is often directly linked to health. And modeling can maintain the beauty of the body to a certain level. This is a typical mental physical type of talent. This also made Asaba Kazuma understand why Rina Ishihara stayed at home and did not exercise regularly or even do basic body shaping. But Rina Ishihara's body shape is envied by Maya Amamaya, who has spent a lot of money to learn from female personal trainers all the time. At that time, Amamyamai was shocked when she saw Rina Ishihara for the first time. With her eyesight, she could tell at first glance that Ishihara Rina was not the kind of girl who had received good fitness exercises and body shaping. At first she thought it was a gift from God. But who would have thought that this would be the effect of modeling? In fact, no matter how many points are added to Asaba Kazuma's body, he can maintain a perfect posture. Not to mention Heian's powerful memory, this is a huge bug in the field of scientific research. Maya Amamaya's overclocking mode, which can directly improve the overall quality of the adjuster from the basic quality level, is also a model of cheating. But he never expected that there would be such an adjustment talent as Minamoto Shinzuru. Take Amamyamai's agent hanging up or something, this already belongs to Zyode. Fortunately, this guy didn't attach sensory sharing to Heian, otherwise. Qian Yufengjian, who was lying in the simulation space, suddenly felt his scalp numb. Wait. When Amamyamai was simulating the line, Minamoto Mizurui once showed up in front of Yuin. Minamoto, who has already tried to learn Zyode like Amamyamai, wouldn't have tried to plant shared senses in the real Tongtende, Kaian. Qian Kazuma shivered subconsciously. This is really hard to say. When he met Zhen Zhenxian that time, he was curious about one thing. That was the detailed research direction of Heian and herself. Not many people knew where she got the news from and came to intercept him immediately. And the first time the two met, it was really unpleasant. The two sides started talking to each other as soon as they met. Qian Kazuma didn't know where she could get such bad intentions. Could it be? He was very affectionate with his wife Qian at that time. In fact, it's not just before meeting. After he met Zhen, Asaba Kazuma shared the 5 days of sensory cooling, although he did not break through the last step, but he did. There are quite a lot of little moves. Girls' hands are always cold. Asaba Kazuma's own body temperature is a bit high. So when playing outside, whenever I feel the heat, I always like to hold Heian's little hand to cool down. When I was sleeping with Rina at night, whenever I felt a little hot under the quilt and almost sweating, I would just hug Rina. Small cooling pillow, cool, soft and very comfortable. Asahikazuma's thoughts began to fly around as she thought about it. He slightly restrained his brain circuits that had nowhere to go, and focused his attention on the love simulation again. He wanted to see what tricks this guy Yuan Zhenxian wanted to play. The simulation continues to unfold. Yuan Zhenxian suddenly realized a problem that was troubling her. That's because she seemed to be muttering about the impact of sensory sharing on her. When she was attached to the maid before, most of the time because the maid lived with her, the things that the two parties came into contact with were basically the same. In addition, she was so close that she could take back the shared senses at any time, so that she basically had no feel the changes in yourself. When the shared senses were thrown onto Amamayamai, she was stuck for a long time. Especially when Amamayamai received private tutoring every week, how could Minamoto Mizuru give up Odae's opportunity like this? So from time to time, I would be immersed in Amamayamai's state of learning knowledge. This makes it even harder to influence her thinking. But this situation has changed dramatically recently. Because Jen Zhenxian covered his face in pain. Amamayamai, you are really a born liar. In the 5 days before when they shared their senses, Minamoto Shinzuru accepted the messy roles played by Amamayamai after she kept changing her identity, and had a rough time with Asaba many times. She was vaguely aware of some problems at the time, but they were very few. Because Amamayamai was so involved in her role that she couldn't see the problem with Amamayamai at all. No. Perhaps it began to be affected many years ago. After all, she was originally more inclined to have a gloomy personality, but after sharing her senses with Amamayamai from time to time for such a long time, although she is still very extreme, her overall personality is no longer gloomy. In the past, her senses towards Amamayamai were more inclined to be bored. After all, she had so many more people to share things that belonged to her. When she was young, she was not as complicated as she is now. If you don't like it, you don't like it. But my senses have been shared with Amamayamai for a long time. It seems that deep down in my heart, I really think of her as a sister more or less. After all, when sharing Amamayamai's senses and gently stroking her healthy and energetic body with her hands, how could Amamayamai become tired of her body? Unknowingly, I'm afraid it actually had some impact. Perhaps this was also the reason why she never killed Amamayamai later. Because just now, she painfully discovered that she seemed to have been polluted by Amamayamai. After her latest brain show, she linked her shared senses to Amamayamai. Things changed dramatically. As we all know, love and another word that is easily harmonized are actually intertwined. Otherwise, the famous talented woman during the Republic of China would not have said the words "the passage to the deepest part of a woman's heart." Not to mention, Asaba Kazuma also superimposed his senses on Amamayamai's body at that time. Every movement made herself and Amamayamai feel an indescribable joy. But, the situation between Amamayamai and Asaba Kazuma is simply a feeling of affection that normal people cannot understand. The crazy increase in favorability and the unimaginable strong love produced in this situation were like a wave that submerged Minamoto Shinzuru's even somewhat barren life. When he came back to his senses, he suddenly realized that he had this unpredictable emotion by stealing Amamayamai's emotions. But the emotions conveyed cannot be deceived. Assume that there are absolutely real virtual games in this world. From birth, a person is immersed in the world of virtual games throughout his life, experiencing gatherings, separations, and separations, and has never been offline. For that person, virtual experiences are real memories. Same. Jensensen realized that he was careless. Amamayamai's inseparable emotions from Asaba Kazuma's body, through shared senses, reversely polluted her nearly blank brain database. So that she actually felt a kind of coquettishness that she shouldn't have when facing Asahikazuma. Request for help diary. The new book is on the list today. If you have time, go check it out after 0 o'clock on Monday, and then help read the new book on Monday and Tuesday. In addition, I recommend a new book by an author who has gone to sea. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. We've traveled through Tokyo, who still wants to simulate love? Author, Fei Hui. Chapter 213. When he realized this problem, Yuan Zhenxian already felt that something was going to happen. But, she can't seem to stop behaving like this. She really wanted to stand up again. Not the false sense of walking experienced through sensory sharing. It is to rely on your own legs to really stand up. So I can only share my senses with my good sister, enjoy her joy and happiness, and then pollute my mind. Realizing this, a trace of helplessness flashed across Minamoto's face. Although the experience felt is false. The affection felt was false. But the impact on one's own senses is real. To put it in a more vivid way, if the world is a game, then Asaba Kazuma is playing Earth Online while Crazy and Amama Yamai unlocks the favorability progress bar. But now there is a bug. Due to a system program conflict, Amama Yamai now has a sister who has telepathy with her. From time to time, she opens a small account to experience her sister's taste. As a result, the evil man named Asaba Kazuma, when he conquered Amama Yamai and advanced the progress bar, he also advanced his sister's progress bar. The issue is, for people outside the game, it's nothing more than the progress bar advancing. But for the NPC Minamoto Shinzuru who lives in Earth Online, whether he wants to admit it or not, his favorability points are accumulated. Or is it related to the fact that I don't think much about resisting? After all, when she put the sharing of senses on the maid, she didn't reduce her hatred for Hidenori Minamoto because of this. But why? Why is this happening to me now? After hesitating for a moment, Yuan Zhenxian finally came to his senses. Is it because I don't dislike him that much, so I accepted this result invisibly? Impossible. Absolutely impossible. Yuan Zhenxian's mood suddenly became excited. How could she, Genma, have such emotions towards Asaba Kazuma? You know, before being tricked by Amama Yamai's design, her knowledge of Asaba Kazuma was limited to information and a newly updated photo. In other words, she had not even met Asaba Kazuma at that time. Under such circumstances, she actually lowered her resistance to him subconsciously. How can it be? How can this be? She is Minamoto Shinzen. How could this kind of problem happen to ordinary girls? It's a pity that Yuan Zhenxian still doesn't understand what love doesn't know where it starts, it goes deep. In other words, she vaguely guessed something, but was unwilling to admit it. Minamoto Shinzen, you are so arrogant. She was so arrogant that she clearly guessed the truth, but still directly chose to deny it. Because she thought it was impossible for her to have this kind of emotion. When Minamoto Shinzuru falls into self-doubt, the basis for your plan is steadily advancing. Because you gained more planning and production experience in the previous simulation, this time, you wrote extremely detailed plans for each different team that started construction. Even the character design and basic storyboards have been sorted out. The content is so detailed that the animators at animation studios who have seen the project say it is teaching people how to make animations from scratch. Some people even said helplessly that this level of guidance can almost be said to be a step-by-step teaching, allowing a newcomer to have a chance of producing good content. When the news came out, it quickly attracted the attention of Faishi Entertainment. As the core of Faishi Entertainment's aesthetics, you actually hold an almost irreplaceable position within Faishi Entertainment. Several partners of Faishi Entertainment all have a mindset that favors straight men and straight women in science and engineering, and their aesthetic abilities are relatively weak when it comes to aesthetics. In their view, what you designed is simply a rare example of the perfect fusion of industrial beauty and biological beauty. It can even be said that for the vast majority, for this group of relatively simple technical geeks, your existence is simply the foundation to fill their strategic shortcomings. Especially after experiencing your advantages in the field of publicity before, I am even more out of control. So, after you came up with a super detailed plan, several people from the animation studio sent a letter of visit and went to the animation studio to see the situation. After the visit day, Fi's Entertainment quickly reached an internal consensus. This time, they understood faster than in any previous love simulation that you are indispensable to Fi's Entertainment. They put aside the last grudge and happily agreed to the merger of the two companies. Just like in the previous simulation, the founders of Fi Entertainment happily took away the DLC The Sky of Fate that they had longed for. They swear to tell you that the reason why they want to create a company is to collect some color waste for themselves. This is SLG. SLG games cannot be without sense, just like the West cannot lose TLSL, and the 3D area cannot be without Tifa. And you, my friend, you who took out the Sky of Fate are the real heroes. It didn't take long for news about the merger between Animation Studio and Fi Entertainment to spread wildly in the industry. Everyone was shocked. This simulation is different from Amamiyami's simulation. Amamiyami's simulation, the merger between Animation Studio and Fi Entertainment is already in the middle and late stages. There have been many cases where the two companies cooperated with each other because of you. But this time, the two companies have almost no business dealings, and they belong to different fields of games and animation. At least in the eyes of most outsiders, there is not much relationship between the two companies. At most, it's Asaba Kazuma, the boss of Animation Studio, who is also the main artist of Fi's Entertainment. People soon discovered that the Animation Studio began to become restless in all aspects. The first thing that happened was about the divestiture of Animation Studio-related patents under your guidance. The patent divestiture was quickly completed and transferred to the corresponding patent operating company. Since the business has not officially expanded this time, the divestiture of related patents is easier than you think. Various animation and music patents were transferred to the new company, and music patents began to be registered in large quantities. Unlike before, this time, because your strength has not been recognized by most fans in the animation industry, it is still open to debate, and many people are worried about the prospects of Animation Studio and Fi Entertainment. Until under your leadership, the two animations Kyunula, The White Album, and Kyunula, The Sky of Fate came out ahead of schedule. At the same time, news that the corresponding DLC will be launched soon spread. No one could have imagined that you would be so desperate. There are also many people who find it difficult to understand why Animation Studio's cash flow suddenly expanded to such an extent. Someone began to try to investigate the truth behind the scenes, but as soon as the investigation started, the progress of the investigation was blocked by beings from behind the scenes. Relevant commercial investigation agencies immediately stopped the investigation, because they discovered that what was blocking them was the Genji Group, which has huge influence throughout Japan. It's just that there were a lot of hiccups in the process. The employees of Animation Studio were surprised to find that their company seemed to be extremely popular within a certain big force. In other words, they are extremely popular among the two people within the big forces. Every employee of Amamiyami Animation Studio knows that they have cooperated with Animation Studio early and gave Animation Studio a very important cash gift in the early stage, allowing Animation Studio to enter the fast lane of development. However, I never expected that not long after, there was another person whose appearance was not inferior to that of the office angel Rina Ishihara, the general manager in charge of the copyright company and entertainment company, Shianayuin, and the number one behind-the-scenes financier of the animation studio, AIM. The girl Miyamai came to the company. That is a girl pushing a wheelchair who looks extremely pitiable. It is very rare that three girls well known to everyone in the animation studio have shown strong hostility towards the girl named Minamoto Mizuru. Manager Rina Ishihara showed a rare uneasy expression. Some people speculate that it may be because the settings between Ms. Minamoto and her overlap to some extent, and she is afraid that her boss will focus more attention on Ms. Minamoto. Shiinauman felt a little subtle insecurity about Minamoto's arrival. So when dealing with Minamoto Shinjin, although she did not show a strong objection, she could only be said to be lukewarm. The one who reacted the most was Amamiyamai. She is like a wild beast that has been invaded in her territory, grinning and trying to drive out this new uninvited guest. But in the end, I don't know why, she finally gave up this choice. It didn't take long for the capital flow from Yuan Zhenzhen to start flowing into LE Animation Studio. This makes you feel uneasy about things being out of your control. But you finally did not refuse after Amamiyamai's persuasion. This is also the reason why when other animation companies want to investigate the situation of the animation studio, they are immediately blocked. Although to a certain extent, neither Amamiyamai nor Genma Genji can be equated with the Genji group, but as candidates for the next head of the family, both of them have mastered some of Genji's high-quality assets. In addition, the internal factions of the Genji family and the internal executives of the Genji group have already taken sides between the two. There is no centrist, and the centrist is the common enemy of both. In this case, it can be said that except for Minamoto Zayashi, who is currently in charge of the Genji group, Amamiyamai and Genji are the two most prestigious and powerful people in the Genji group. This is also the reason why in the previous simulation, Genma Minamoto dared to directly target Hidenori Minamoto, and why Mai Amamiya was able to sort out her escape after being kidnapped. And once the two of them stand together, they can almost mobilize most of the resources of the Genji group other than the non-core interests, including a large number of interest-free loans and assistance from the talent supply chain for your development. You asked Minamoto Mizuru why you came to the animation studio to cooperate with him. Minamoto's answer is simple: because I want to stand up, and you and Amamiyamai are my only antidote, that's all. We've traveled through Tokyo, who still wants to simulate love? Author, Fei Se Hui. Chapter 214. Asahi Kazuma never expected that the two sisters would quarrel directly over this matter. Fortunately, this is his office. If it were in public, this topic would be a bit too violent. Amamiyamai gritted her teeth and looked at her nominal sister. Are there such shameless people in this world? The reason why she did this before was that she was very aware of the bad character of Minamoto Shinzuru. If she used the shared senses on herself once, it would not just be this time, but the previous time, and the previous time. She had done this countless times. Being smart, she quickly realized the truth. I'm afraid that without her realizing it, Minamoto Shinzen had used sensory sharing on her more than once. No wonder she felt so tricky every time I faced her, like a hedgehog that protected almost all of her body, making it difficult to attack. Emotionally, this guy knows a lot about his situation. It would be fine if Minamoto Shinzuru only learned about the business information. She was confident that she would not lose in the conspiracy. But the terrible thing is that sensory sharing allows Minamoto Shinzuru to understand her thinking. This means that all of his reactions, including his coping methods and handling methods, have been thoroughly figured out by Minamoto. This is no longer a matter of being willing to admit defeat, but a complete trampling on the achievements Amamiyamai has made over the years. So after discovering that Asaba Kazuma was able to restrain Genmajan's talent, she launched her revenge without hesitation. You have to make the stinky sister pay something, right? Who would have thought that what was originally just a price for her would now become a reward? Amamiyamai's nose was so angry that she was crooked. Now this guy actually came to Asaba Kazuma's company. To be honest, if she hadn't been worried about Yuan Xiudian's side and worried that old Biden would take advantage of the collision between the two, she would actually be reluctant to let Yuan Zhenxian in. But she soon discovered that Yuan Zhenxian didn't cause her much trouble. It can even be said that the two of them cooperated well to a certain extent. Now it is discovered that this bastard is the body of Genkinya Kazuma. To be precise, I want to feel free to have sex. This made Amamiya Mai so angry that her face turned black. It's too much, it's really too much. Punishing you once is called punishment. I punish you many times and you still accept it with a smile, then it becomes a reward and you become an M. Of course, my Amamiya didn't want this situation to happen, but it didn't take long for Minamoto Shinjin to find Minamoto Zayashi. It didn't take long for the current head of the Genji family to find my Amamiya. Ma-yi, can you introduce this person to me? Minamoto Zai looked at Asaba Kazuma who was standing next to Amamiya Mai, with a helpless smile on his face. Amamiya Mai curled her lips. Asaba Kazuma, one of my partners, a true genius. Then he looked at Asaba Kazuma. My father, Minamoto Zayashi, is the current head of the Minamoto clan. Although she knew that Asaba Kazuma knew Minamoto Zayashi, in order to avoid being exposed, they usually had a tacit understanding and pretended not to know these people. Asayu Kazuma stretched out his hand towards Minamoto Zai. During the handshake, he suddenly noticed that Yuan Zai was looking at him with strange eyes. Asaba Kazuma reacted instantly because the relationship between him and Amamiya Mai was a bit too familiar. Pretending to be ignorant, he directly led Yuan Zai to sit down on the sofa in the office. Not long after Yuan Zai sat down, he sighed. Yesterday Zhenxian came to see me, and I was actually surprised because this kid had never come to ask me to do something specifically before. You know that sometimes children are too sensible and always lose a little bit of the joy of being a father. Unfortunately, you and she are both such children. But it is precisely because of this that I understand that if one day, you or Zhenxian come to me for something, it is probably because I really don't know what to do. Yuan Zai is a middle-aged man who seems to be quite kind-hearted. There was a touch of gentleness when he was sitting on the sofa talking. From his face, Asaba Kazuma could feel that the young Genzai was probably a handsome guy who could leave a deep impression on others, and he could vaguely see the scenery of his youth. Maybe at some point in the past, he was also the midnight dream of some girls. Time has left traces on him, accumulating an older temperament. He said to Amamiya Mai in an extremely gentle voice. Mai, I heard from Shinzuru that if your adjustment talent is matched with that of Asaba Kazuma, is it possible to help Shinzuru stand up? Asahi Kazuma and Amamiya Mai both had embarrassed looks on their faces. Amamiya Mai cursed inwardly. This guy Minamoto Shinjin really dares to tell his family about anything. Kinya Kazuma also turned his head away subconsciously. You can't tell Yuan Zai, they are not willing to do this kind of thing. And this Minamoto Shinjin, do you dare to say such a thing? Seemingly seeing the hesitation and entanglement between Asaba Kazuma and Amamiya Mai, Minamoto Zai seemed to realize something was wrong. Will using this method cause you two a lot of trouble? Where is this troublesome problem? Asahi Kazuma and Amamiya Mai both screamed in their hearts. But they have also become convinced of a problem. That is, when Minamoto Shinzen told Minamoto Zai about this matter, he did not tell Minamoto Zai exactly what to do. Can you please tell me what cooperation is needed to use your adjustment talents? If we can use modern science and technology to assist, I will try my best to cooperate. Asaba Kazuma and Amamiya Mai looked at each other. What can they say? Can we say that what this thing requires is not the cooperation of technology, but the coordination of movements between two people? Asahi Kazuma was also a little embarrassed. After being promoted to the gene crown, the gene code seems to have undergone some subtle changes, so that when the idea of sharing senses is cast, it seems to have some wonderful effects on others. This may be why Minamoto's symptoms of being unable to stand up due to genetic modification were able to get a lot of stimulation when he got the story between Asaba Kazuma and Amamiya Mai, allowing Minamoto to absorb part of his thoughts. The power of the genetic crown. For most of the special diseases of adjusters born from adjusting genes in this era, the gene crown has a strong therapeutic effect. The problem with Minamoto's legs is probably the same. Putting it this way, he seemed to be able to explain why such an outrageous situation occurred. After all, when the love between men and women is intense, they will always feel more or less unprecedented mental shock. Especially the little girl Amamiya Mai, with her own ability, she will definitely fall completely as quickly as possible again and again. In this case, it will definitely affect Asaba Kazuma on the other side of the battlefield. Then, under the influence of Zyapayake, Kinya Kazuma's extremely thick armor will have a considerable armor-breaking effect. In other words, if you want Asaba Kazuma to achieve the goal of healing Minamoto Shinzuru as quickly as possible, Mai Amamiya, as a slut, is probably the best choice. But, how could they have the nerve to tell this? So Unzai could only watch the two people's eyes facing each other for a long time, but did not give a specific solution. Finally, Amamiya Mai showed a strange expression and said, "Father, you have to understand that the consequences of this matter are very serious. If you accidentally fail to handle it well, the harem will need to be borne by you." Genzai vaguely heard the strange flavor in his daughter's voice, but out of respect for Gen Zhenxian, he still said without hesitation, "Of course, no matter what the problem is, I will do my best to fulfill my promise. This is what a father should do." Asahi Kazuma blinked. Amamiya Mai raised her eyebrows. A funny thought flashed through both of their minds. I'm afraid Unzai still hasn't figured out what the key information hidden by Yuan Zhenxian is. In other words, this matter is not important to Unzai. The important thing is that in this way, the two of them can feel that he attaches great importance to this matter, and then the development of the ending expected by Minamoto Shinzuru can be promoted as soon as possible. Only in this way can we make up for the debt Yuan Zhenxian has owed to his daughter Yuan Zhenxian for so many years. After all, before the Shenzi project was launched, Zhenxian was also a child who could walk normally. It's not the scariest thing to have never gotten it. After all, people who have been at the bottom of the well can adapt to it to some extent. For those who once had it but have lost it now, it is even more painful, because the memories they once had will continue to echo in their minds. But now the most painful situation has occurred. I once had it, but now it's gone. I found a chance to save myself, but I found that others didn't agree. How can it be possible if we don't try our best to seize this opportunity? So, Minamoto Zai came over. I agreed to this. Amamiya Mai looked at this old father who treated her well, and finally sighed and agreed. After all, Minamoto Zai may be one of the few people in the world who truly values her. Especially after knowing that her successful entry into the Genji family was actually arranged by Minamoto Zai, there was even less reason. After all, as an original orphan, being able to spend the first half of his life with Tomoko Amamiya and Genji as a normal person is a debt that is difficult to repay no matter what. So she finally thought about it and agreed. But she still looked at Kinya Kazuma. Of course, this is just my family's opinion. What Kinya Kazuma thinks depends on her. At least on this matter, it was rare for her to listen to Minamoto Zai's position. Not to mention, she suddenly looked forward to the outcome after her old father, who really raised her as a daughter, knew the truth. Everyone is optimistic. It's not me who forced him to do this, but Minamoto Shinzan himself agreed, and my father is willing to bear the price. With this faint bad taste, she hid the slight discomfort in her heart. Asahi Kazuma also chose to agree. After all, after thinking about it, since this matter has been targeted by Gen Zhenxian, it is basically impossible to get rid of her. Asaba Kazuma can lock him in a small dark room when he is in a shared sense state, but this does not mean that he can stop Minamoto Shinzuru from putting the shared senses on Amamiya Mai. Instead of doing this, it would be better to fight quickly. You and Amamiya Mai agreed to this outrageous deal. Your daily life has returned to normal, but the legend between the two eldest ladies of the animation studio, Asaba Kazuma and Genji, has spread in some areas. This time, the whole Genji dances because of you, and a message begins to spread in some areas that have channels to contact the higher society. It is said that the competition between the two sisters of the Genji family for the head of the Genji family has spread from business to mate selection. Asaba Kazuma is the one chosen by the two. But there are also many people who deny this, because in their opinion, it is somewhat unreasonable that the two best girls from Genji are fighting each other for a man. Amama Yamai didn't say much. She herself couldn't guarantee that she would be the final winner among Asaba Kazuma's girlfriends, or rather, there could be no sole winner. Zyapayake is Zyapayake in every sense. And she doesn't seem to care too much about this matter. After all, Japan's upper-class aristocracy has never been short of chaos. You and Amama Yamai did not do that consciously. Only when you are in love with each other can you naturally continue your life. Minamoto Shinzen doesn't dare to rush you at all. After all, for her, she is the loser in this game, and she took the initiative to recognize this identity. About half a year later, perhaps the accumulation finally reached its limit. After spending another pleasant night between you and Amama Yamai, under the influence of the strong pleasure conveyed, Minamoto's legs finally there is a reaction. The matters at your Biological Research Institute are continuing, because regarding matters related to adjusters, your research has been carried out very secretly. Not long after, the overlords around the world began to hold a meeting about the future development trends of adjusters. Because of your and Shianayuan's outstanding achievements in this field this year, it is natural that you have become a participant in this conference that covers the big names in biology. In the same month, Minamoto, who could barely control his feet, began rehabilitation exercises. You didn't pay much attention to her. The deal between the two parties has ended. The next step is who can be the final winner between Amama Yamai and her. Another month passed, and a batch of new shows from Animation Studio naturally became the focus of everyone's attention at that time. On this day, after celebrating with Rina and Kane, Gao Gao and Maya Amamaya held a celebration banquet with the company employees. The banquet was filled with laughter and laughter. After the meeting, you happily took Amama Yamai away from the scene and went to your temporary residence. Minamoto Shinjin has been unusually well behaved during this period and has hardly made any noise to you two. Even when you checked Amama Yamai's body, you didn't find that Minamoto Shinzuru had implanted shared sensory thoughts. This surprised you both. Could it be that the little witch is planning to be a good person? As you were getting drunker, you and Amama Yamai were hanging out together. When you were about to act, you subconsciously lost your thoughts on Amama Yamai. This is your habit during this period. You were about to say with a smile, "She is still very honest today," but suddenly you found that a familiar thought appeared in the half-drunk and half-awake Amama Yamai. Minamoto Shinzuru. What are you doing again, /? We've traveled through Tokyo, who still wants to simulate love? Author, Fei Se Hui-Xiang. Chapter 215. As the scene unfolds, Asaba Kazuma put the half-asleep Amama Yamai on the bed. Then he made a call directly to Yuen Zhenxian and said with a black face, "Minamoto Shinzen, what are you doing?" Yuen Zhenxian on the other end of the phone said in an aggrieved voice, What didn't I do? I just wanted to." "Chien Kazuma, I think you just want to be hummed." Then the aggrieved voice of Yuen Zhenxian on the other end of the phone changed directly, and he said with some surprise, "How about you hurry up?" Kinyu Kazuma almost cursed. "Haven't you already graduated? Come here quickly and take your thoughts back, or I will lock you in a dark room later. Don't blame me. It's okay to stay in a small dark room. Although I can't feel the same as my good sister, I still have a sense of participation." Hearing the voice on the other end of the phone, Asahi Kazuma was really angry. This source of true string must be poisonous. Forget it, let's not continue. He doesn't have to do this kind of thing. Just when he was about to hang up the phone, Amama Yamai put her arms around his neck. "Leave her alone, lock her in a dark room, and let's continue. Asaba Kazuma frowned. Amamiya Mai didn't like Genma Mahara sharing her senses with her. Why was she so proactive today? Asaba Kazuma actually doesn't know much about Genma, but he feels that he still understands Amamiya Mai. With her character, she shouldn't agree to such a thing. If it hadn't been for Minamoto Ayashi's personal lobbying, Amamiya Mai would not have agreed to this matter. But now, something is wrong. Something is really wrong. What does Amamiya Mai seem to want to tell me? Then, just follow her instructions. Asaba Kazuma once again implanted the shared sense directly into Amamiya Mai's body. After a precise set of grabbing, absorbing thoughts, closing the small dark room, Amamiya Mai said happily. Have you dealt with that annoying spirit? Asaba Kazuma nodded. After a while, Amamiya Mai's expression changed. The originally intoxicated expression suddenly became sober. There must be something wrong with Minamoto Shinjin. Asaba Kazuma frowned, not understanding why Amamiya Mai made such a judgment. Amamiya Mai shook her head and said, I know her well. She is a person who is extremely confident in herself. Perhaps it is because of the control of information brought by shared senses, or perhaps because of the self-confidence she has developed. She would not do such a thing. Amamiya sighed and said, in fact, the only thing that can control her is that her own life is threatened, or it can help her stand up. You want to say that she doesn't feel any shame when she shares her senses with me? That's impossible. But in order to stand up earlier, she still endured this humiliation. However, this does not mean that she will naturally get used to this reward after standing up. In fact, this is not the case. Kinya Kazuma thought for a moment and nodded. Amamiya Mai looked at Asaba Kazuma with a smile and said, Are you a little disappointed? Qian Yufengjian was a little confused. What are you missing? Amamiya Mai said in surprise. According to my understanding of men, the originally unattainable rich lady had to rely on you for various reasons, and finally couldn't live without you. Isn't this a really cool article? Now that I find out that it's not that I can't live without you, but another reason, aren't you a little bit disappointed? Asayu Kazuma's face darkened. What does this mean? Has he ever touched Yuan Zhenxian? There is nothing missing that is not missing. The two moved quickly. As he spoke, he had already stood up and changed his clothes, and was about to leave the room directly. In such a short period of time, Amamiya Mai had already arranged a group of guards. Come on, let's go take a look, Amamiya Mai said with a serious face. Asaba Kazuma nodded. He wanted to see what kind of tricks Yuan Zhenxian was up to. On the way, Asaba Kazuma said a little strangely, That's not right, I didn't see any movement from Minamoto Hideyori's side. Amamiya Mai also frowned, It's not that old Biden? It's because of someone else. In Amamiya Mai's view, the only person most likely to take action against Minamoto Shinori is that stunned lunatic Minamoto Hideyori. After all, for him, as long as he can achieve his goal, no matter what he does, he will not feel any guilt. Even someone like Amamiya Mai, who has become numb to many things, wants to spit when facing Hideyori Minamoto. This person really has no bottom line. But now it seems that the one who threatens Minamoto Shinori is probably not Minamoto Hideyori. Soon, the two of them followed the guards they summoned and arrived at one of Minamoto's villas. This bippo was bought by Minamoto Shinjin with money recently. Deep in Tokyo, a relatively less noisy area, the purpose is to do some rehabilitation nearby. After all, Minamoto has been in a wheelchair for too long. Now that I have suddenly regained a new lease of life, I have even put down a lot of my company's business and put more time and energy into rebuilding myself. But she didn't expect that not long after she moved out to focus on reconstruction, she would be in danger. Soon, a group of people arrived at Minamoto's current residence. The other courtyard is very quiet. There was nothing that seemed noteworthy. Amamyamai made a move to rush forward, and a group of guards climbed in quietly. Amamyamai turned back and glanced at Asaba Kazuma. "Hold me in." Asahi Kazuma nodded. A princess hug immediately lifted her up. Without any thought of climbing, she just put a little force on her feet and her whole body rose into the air. A group of guards who were still helping each other to climb over the wall looked confused as Asaba Kazuma stood on the wall holding Maya Amamaya, turned over and jumped into the other courtyard. Not long after, a group of people swarmed up and knocked on the door of Minamoto's house kindly. In the hall, everyone saw Genzen Xian sitting on the sofa eating fruit. She looked very relaxed, with a relaxed and cheerful smile on her face. He didn't look coerced in any way. Amamyamai frowned and asked someone to check the surrounding situation. Genzen Xian didn't stop her, but just let them search the surrounding area. "Miss, there is nothing abnormal." Not long after, the security guard came to deliver a message. Amamyamai frowned, waved her hand to ask the guards to retreat, then frowned, and said, "I thought something happened to you, but it turned out that nothing happened to you? Does it hurt to be idle? I don't have such a thing. Besides, can't I just enjoy a little extra fun from my good sister? Obviously you were happy to reward me before." Amamyamai's face turned dark. Minamoto's words were a little too lethal. Genzen Xian touched his cheek with his fingertips and said cutely, "Genzen, let me guess, with my good sister's character, you should still think that I have no idea about Asaba Kazuma at all, right?" Amamyamai. "Genzen, I would even say that with my arrogance, I will definitely not have anything to do with Asaba Kazuma's car after the matter is over." Amamyamai. "Genzen, then you thought that I encountered some kind of danger, so I directly used my shared senses, so now I am rushing over to ask for help." Amamyamai. Genzen Xian sighed and said, "But I'm sorry, I'm just a 7-star fish." Amamyamai. Seeing the anger on Amamyamai's face starting to rise, Asaba Kazuma patted her who wanted to punch Genmijin to death, and said calmly, "Let me talk to her." Amamyamai was silent for a while, then quietly retreated behind him. Asahi Kazuma then turned his head and looked at the second young lady of the Genji family and said, "Minamoto Shinzuru, who are you?" Yuan Zhenxian frowned and said with dissatisfaction, "So what do you want to say?" Asaba Kazuma shook his head and said, "Okay, stop pretending, you are not Minamoto." Genzen Xian showed a look of dissatisfaction visible to the naked eye. "Kinha Kazuma, although we can be considered to have many experiences, but this does not mean that you can slander me casually." Kinha Kazuma sighed. The next moment, the adjustment talent overclocking mode derived from Amamyamai was activated. An unparalleled power gathered in him, and his aura was rising steadily. Minamoto's expression finally changed. "What are you going to do?" "Chien-yu Kazuma, I'm warning you not to mess around." "Okay, you're being a show-off. Your timbre is too different from Minamoto's. It seems like you're not used to imitating her speech." Asaba Kazuma vaguely remembered that among the many adjustment genes he had absorbed before, there was once an adjustment gene with a very special effect. It is a special gene derived from props, which can temporarily suppress the consciousness of others and perform the most rudimentary control of the body. However, this genetic adjustment talent is very dangerous to use. Because, suppressing other people's consciousness is equivalent to a collision of mental powers. If the mental power is obviously weaker than others, not only may there be no way to suppress other people's consciousness, but they may also be suppressed by others. Of course, the most important thing is the source of this adjustment gene. Props goddesses. Goddesses, it can greatly improve the utilization rate of its own adjustment genes and obtain part of the memory of the goddess Kagaya. The achievement store of Kyunulu, Love is War 2077 makes it very clear. The source of this thing is the goddess Kagaya, who Minamoto Hideori has been pursuing for many years. Kagaya, you haven't enjoyed the feeling of being suppressed, right? The next moment, an abyss-like consciousness entered Yuan Zhengxian's body. Among the countless twisted consciousness spaces that resembled blue electric light, Asahi Kazuma quickly noticed a consciousness exuding vigorous vitality. Very majestic, very powerful, but he is stronger now. Asaba Kazuma suppressed this consciousness mercilessly, almost pulling this consciousness out of Minamoto's body and bringing it back to his own body. Countless adjusted genes began to riot. The unknown consciousness that was pulled directly into Asaba Kazuma's body without any resistance began to scream sharply. However, as soon as he made a little sound, he was silenced by Jian Yufengjian. As Kinha Kazuma retracted his hand, he looked at Genzan Jin. At this time, Yuan Zhenxian had fallen on the sofa and passed out. Minamoto Shinzan was sent to the hospital by you. Looking at the consciousness locked in your body by your mental power, you showed no mercy at all and started cooking directly. As you guessed before, this consciousness really comes from Kagaya. Over the years, the woman known as Princess Kagaya has been wandering around the world. Every once in a while, she will feed her fallen hair, skin flakes, and even the blood from intentional cuts to various birds, insects, and fish. Her genes are extremely corrosive. Once eaten into the body, it will subtly transform the user's body. But this transformation is not necessarily successful. On the contrary, the mortality rate is very high. So most of the time, she will carefully use those animals for experiments. After many experiments, there are always some animals that can fuse her genes to a certain extent. As humans are at the top of the food chain, these genes will eventually be enriched into the human body. Using nature as a site for deletion, there will eventually be a chance to change some human bodies. If she only relies on her alone, even if Kagaya is given more means, it will be difficult to achieve her goal of transforming the world. But after cloning technology began to be tested around the world in the last century, Princess Kagaya saw an opportunity. Kagaya began to use means to gain control of a biological agency responsible for cloning, and began to clone her own body cells on a large scale. Her purpose of retreat is not to copy herself, but to use this method to produce more fairy meat on a large scale that can be fed to wild animals. Since the end of the last century, she has released these fairy meats on a large scale to a large number of marine creatures to eat. With this large-scale release, huge amounts of abnormal genes began to spread among marine life at a terrifying speed. Then time goes back to the 20th century. With a long period of release, these adjusted genes spread to a considerable number of marine organisms. With the development of shipbuilding technology, the offshore fishing industry has developed in various countries around the world. A large amount of fish has entered the dining tables of every family. After many years of influence, I don't know when the number of adjusters born around the world began to increase steadily. And behind all this is Kagaya's own calculation. You imprisoned Kagaya's consciousness and caused her to suffer tremendous pain by splitting her consciousness, and finally took the initiative to tell all this. As for Kagaya's purpose, through this method, the greatest explosion of adjusters will appear among human beings around the world. She believes that in this way, human beings around the world can further evolve and enter the starry sky faster. She is tired of everything in the world, but she is also afraid of death. She had this idea many years ago when she saw that there were other lives outside the starry sky. Go and look at the stars. If you have a monthly ticket, you can go to Zinshu to vote for it. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. We've traveled through Tokyo. Who still wants to simulate love? Author, Fei Se Hui. Chapter 216. Go and look at the stars. This is Kagaya's simplest desire. Origined from human beings' yearning for endless deep space, destroyed by human beings' fear of loneliness and death. As you continued to dismember her soul, she finally couldn't bear the pain and told the truth. The scene unfolds. I said, stop dismembering my consciousness. Qian Yufengjian coldly struck at that consciousness again. Only Asaba Kazuma could hear Kagaya's screams. He said coldly, what is the purpose of occupying Yuan Zhengxian's body? Kagaya, I have learned about the possibilities of you and your related research institutions. Your research field is deeper than I thought. It may be able to further accelerate the explosion of the number of global adjusters. Asaba Kazuma, there must be other reasons, right? Kagaya's consciousness trembled, and she whispered, I want to recover the sample. Asayu Kazuma frowned, sample. Kagaya, I told you, can you not do it? Without hesitation, Asahi Kazuma turned his spirit into a sharp blade and dismembered a piece of Kagaya's consciousness. Tell me, if you don't tell me, you can wait for death in peace. I said. Kagaya screamed louder. She told a truth that Asahi Kazuma couldn't believe. About the reasons for the awakening of the adjuster gene. The awakening of adjusted genes was not an inevitable result. Kagaya told him that she should be the first person in the world to complete the awakening of adjusted genes. Since the awakening of the first adjustment gene, she has been deeply aware of the huge power hidden in the adjustment gene. So in the past long years, she has been trying to awaken more of her adjustment genes. But later during an awakening, she discovered that her body was starting to lose control. At this moment, she realized that continuing to awaken and adjust her genes would inevitably lead to unfinished consequences. One year, she went to Japan in her spare time to investigate someone who was likely to be an awakened adjuster. Suddenly she discovered that she could actually obtain post-awakening adjustments from this person who had obtained part of her adjustment genes. Gene. At this point, the thoughts come together and I can no longer let them go. She began to consciously work in the field of gene editing to make fairy meat more active. Compared with stabilizing genes, it is easier to make the gene chain of fairy meat more variable. After multiple tests, it was found that even cooking at high temperatures would deactivate these mutated meats, but there were still some things that she could not figure out, and the real root cause of the abnormality in the adjusted genes would be absorbed by the human body. The growing number of adjusters. The filings represent an ever-increasing number of genetic awakenings. As long as the denominator in the number of gene awakenings is large enough, it doesn't matter that the rate of successful awakening is relatively low. She also had this in mind when she spread her genetic samples around the world. When the base of adjusters steadily increases, more people will inevitably be forced to wake up because of the hidden risks of fairy meat. After all, more people will wake up and adjust their genes than before. As long as the crowd is large enough, there will eventually be some awakened adjusted genes that she does not possess. And Yuan Zhenxian is the biggest victim. Because her awakening gene is dangerous. Sensory sharing is a gift that favors the spiritual realm. Mental suppression can have a huge impact on the body. Due to the particularity of this talent, the adjustment genes that should have acted on the material world began to extend to the spiritual realm. In order to obtain this awakening gene, she quietly implanted part of her consciousness into Yuan Zhengxian's brain after discovering that she had successfully awakened her body consciousness. The purpose is to gradually reproduce the spiritual changes on oneself in this way, and finally reach the point where one can successfully acquire this awakening ability. However, the influence of the spiritual realm on the body exceeds Kagaya's cognitive scope. In the process of recreating Minamoto's mental changes with her consciousness, multiple consciousnesses placed a huge burden on Minamoto's body. The end result is obvious. Unable to handle the operation of two consciousnesses at the same time, Minamoto's lower body began to lose control. As soon as Kinha Kazuma heard this operation, he felt very familiar. Then he quickly came to his senses. Isn't this a typical plot where the old man with the ring sucks the genius into useless pieces? What's even more funny is that the ring grandfather will at least reward the genius, unlike Kaguya, who has no bottom line and just runs away after taking advantage. So, you originally just wanted to take advantage of Yuan Zhenxian, but finally you had other ideas after discovering the situation between Hian and me. Qian Yufengjian sneered. What a beautiful princess Kaguya. What a goddess who uses the misery of other people's half-life as material to nourish herself. That's it? Is this the goddess you have longed for, Minamoto Hideori? It's not an exaggeration to say he's a demon. Oh no, I almost forgot, just from the basic moral perspective of human beings, Hidenori Minamoto and Princess Kaguya are really similar to some extent. Sure enough, Danren has enough pursuit of stronger Danren. What's even funnier is that Minamoto's guess turned out to be true. Princess Kaguya is the source of the global adjuster chaos. Okay, since you have confessed so many things, I will let you know as agreed. Qian Yufengjian said calmly. Kaguya was overjoyed. Feeling that Asahi Kazuma had really let go of the restrictions on his consciousness, he scolded him as an idiot in his heart and decisively took away his consciousness. However, what she didn't notice at all was that after her consciousness left Asahi Kazuma's body, Asahi Kazuma meaningfully used the same adjustment talent to directly follow Kaguya's memory light ball and fly towards far away. For a long time, Kaguya's roar suddenly sounded in Asahi Kazuma's mind. Kinha Kazuma, you are unethical. The corners of Kinha Kazuma's mouth slightly raised and she smiled calmly. I have lived for so many years, but my life has really been in vain. I let you go, but I never said I would let you go. I don't care what happens to Minamoto Shinzuru. The fact that Rina died due to genetic modification in the love simulation will be your first. Hian is the second one to be blamed by Tatsuo Fujiki for spreading adjustment genes everywhere. As the source of tragedy in Mai's life, you are the third one. I have experienced death so many times in the simulation, this is your fourth death. The 4 accounts must be paid back in full today. Damn it! Feeling the movement, there was a mental fluctuation in a certain corner, and then everything quickly returned to calm, and a heartfelt smile appeared on Kinha Kazuma's face. This hidden scourge was finally dealt with. You used your keen perception to successfully discover Kaguya's consciousness hidden in Minamoto's body, and followed the direction in which Kaguya's consciousness escaped, directly killing this old monster that had been stored for who knows how many years. System prompt, you have unlocked the achievement The Source of All Evil, achievement points add to 0. In the early morning of the next day, Zhenzen Xian woke up leisurely and hurried to find you without much rest. Did you successfully deal with her? Yuan Zhenxian said excitedly. You nod and tell her that from now on, there will be no more Kaguya in this world. Actually, Asahi Kazuma didn't wait until daytime at all, following the path he had taken before chasing Kaguya, and confirmed Kaguya's residence. Only a cold corpse was left in the residence. System prompt, you have unlocked the achievement First Blood, achievement point add 1. Maya Amamiya took over the follow-up matters. Soon, Princess Kaguya, who left almost no trace in the Information Society, was defined as a stowaway. With the active intervention of Amamiya Mai, she gave the stowaways a great benefit. The Genji group paid for this old monster who had survived for who knows how long and quickly threw it into the incinerator. By the time Minamoto Shinzen came to Asahi Kazuma excitedly, Kaguya had been put into the jar naturally. Minamoto Shinzen was very happy when she got the news. It can be said that she was relieved, but she also felt a slight emptiness inexplicably. Although she had a sense of participation in this annihilation battle, she was more like a bystander more often. Before I could figure out what the problem was, everything had returned to calmness. The scene unfolds. Although Minamoto's feet were still shaking when walking on the ground, he still insisted on walking to Asahi Kazuma and said with a complicated face. Thank you very much for fulfilling my long-cherished wish. Qian Kazuma shook his head and said, there is no need to thank me. It is my own wish to get rid of this guy. I cannot bet the safety of the people I love on whether she will take action against them. Minamoto smiled, and this time the smile she showed was no longer as formulaic as it used to be, hiding a lot of things on her mind. It was a smile full of indescribable beauty. It's like being happy purely for one thing. Kinya Kazuma glanced at her but said nothing. In fact, the relationship between the two is a bit awkward. In other words, because of this love simulation, Amamiya Mai is really good at playing it, so things on Minamoto's side are not ending well now. In other words, the little witch Minamoto Shinzuru seemed to have some unnecessary thoughts about him because of this incident. In the past, when I met him, I would always be tense, or else I would put on a smile that was common to everyone. Although because she looks good, her expression looks quite pleasing to the eye. But after all, it still lacked a little taste. After all, Asaba Kazuma has been wedded by Rina, Yuin, and Mai. Now that I see Yuan Zhengxian's appearance, I really don't feel much fluctuation in my heart. However, his expression soon changed slightly. Because Yuan Zhengxian came directly to him, with a curious look on his face, and said softly, "I didn't expect you to be able to tell at a glance that it wasn't me." The corner of Asahi Kazuma's mouth twitched slightly, and he said calmly, "I have a special adjustment gene, and my perception in this area will be sharper. But you finally saved me when I was in the most danger." There was an indescribable look in Yuan Zhengxian's eyes. "Although I didn't like you very much, when I helplessly called out for help, the response was the silence around me. At that time, I really thought I had no chance, but at that moment, someone suddenly came to me on the light. So I'm grateful. Thank you, Asaba Kazuma." Seeing that she said it sincerely, Chien-yu Kazuma nodded and said, "Okay, I accept your gratitude. I hope you won't come to punish me again." Minamoto shook his head and said, "I'm a little crazy, but I'm not ungrateful. This kindness is unforgettable. As long as it doesn't violate my bottom line, I will try my best to help you." Suddenly, she remembered something and said with a smile, "But let's make it clear first that the fight for the head of the Genji family will not be included." Asaba Kazuma nodded, "This is a matter between you and Mai. Of course, if she needs my help to check whether you have used sensory sharing, that is another matter. Don't expect me not to help her, I'm on her side, and I usually won't refuse her request." Yuan Zhenxian lowered his head slightly, then raised it again after a moment, with a bright smile on his face. "I'm really envious that my sister can have someone to rely on." Asaba Kazuma shook her head, "Don't call her Genma Yum now, the name that Amamiya Mai used before she changed her name back to Genji." Genma Genji pouted and said, "You can't blame me for that. If we are in the Genji family and don't use the surname of Genji, then 100 years from now, will we be the Genji family or the Amamiya family? It's impossible to say clearly." Asaba Kazuma shook his head, "So I said, I will not directly participate in the Genji struggle, provided that you don't use any additional foreign aid. Otherwise, when the time comes, let us try it with our real skills." After hearing what Asahi Kazuma said, Genma didn't reply for a long time. Almost 5 minutes passed, and when Asaba Kazuma was already a little impatient, Minamoto Mizuru finally spoke. "No problem, but I have a question." Kinya Fengjian said, "You say." Zhen Xian licked her lips, "After that, I secretly opened the shared senses on my sister, can you not block me?" Kinya Kazuma. There was a look of shame and annoyance on Kinya Kazuma's face. Then I saw a faint smile on the corner of Minamoto's mouth. "Actually, I was joking." Asaba Kazuma took a deep breath and said, "It's best if you take it as a joke." He was wrong. For a moment, he felt that Minamoto Shinzen had changed his ways. This guy still has such a bad character. Anyway, no matter how you say it, the story between him and her should come to an end here. But he didn't notice that when Yuan Zhenxian turned his head with a smile, there was a little helplessness and a touch of melancholy in his eyes. We've traveled through Tokyo, who still wants to simulate love? Author, Fei Se Hui. Chapter 217. After Kagaya's matter came to an end, you finally felt relieved. The only thing left to worry about is Minamoto Hideyori's side. Not long after, under your joint leadership, Genji launched an internal campaign against Minamoto Hideyori. Unzai acquiesced in your behavior. As a result, the things that Minamoto Hideyori had committed over the years were revealed one by one, and Genji completed the light-speed cut with the previous head of the family. Affected by unknown reasons, in this life, news about the adjuster broke out faster than imagined. Some people began to analyze the possible adjusters in the crowd, and their eyes were first set on those super geniuses. There is no surprise, you are considered by many people to be the most likely adjuster. Many people even think that you must be an awakened person who is very rare among the legendary adjusters. You have no interest in explaining these things, but you also chose the default. Your subordinates in the animation studio suddenly realized, and finally understood why you are so strong and unreasonable. Sometime when you were traveling, you found that there was an accident on the bus in front of you. There were students inside who failed to climb out immediately and were stuck by the twisted iron plates. You couldn't bear it, so you stepped forward and performed a show of breaking the iron sheet with your hands. Someone happened to take a photo of the scene and uploaded it to the internet. It's hard for people to understand how you, who doesn't look strong, can exert so much power. It wasn't until later that someone discovered your identity. It was Asaba Kazuma, who was speculated by many to be the adjuster some time ago. For a time, both your fan base and passers-by began to become agitated. Since the adjuster's news appeared earlier than in the previous simulation timelines, you adjusted your plan accordingly. This time, the game you are preparing to launch is called God of War, and the famous Kratos comes from this game. You even cut out the picture of Kratos on the promotional poster, pasted your own mugshot on it, and sent it directly to Little Blue Bird. The people who flocked to the game were not late for the first-hand game. Instead, when they saw the message you sent, their expressions naturally changed into Subway, Old Man, Mobile Phone.jpg face. Before you had time to enjoy this peaceful life, suddenly, Unzai called you. The scene unfolds. Minamoto Zai met Asaba Kazuma again in a strange cafe. When Asaba Kazuma saw the head of the Genji family, he suddenly realized that his expression seemed to be very bad, with a blue face that seemed to be half dead with anger. Kinya Kazuma felt a little doubt in his heart. He said nothing. He just looked at the two people brought by Unzai quietly. Amamiyamai looked a little embarrassed and wanted to pick her feet. Zhen with an innocent smile on his face. Qian Yufengma's mouth twitched slightly. Broken. I'm afraid it's because Amamiyamai didn't hide what she did back then. Minamoto Zai took a deep breath and said to Asaba Kazuma. The stupid things my two worthless daughters have done must have embarrassed you a lot. Asaba Kazuma didn't reply. The main reason is that I don't know what to say in front of Unzai. There were some things that were inappropriate to talk about in detail, and he couldn't save face. Unzai was also embarrassed. His face turned blue and red. He didn't speak for a long time. Amamiyamai also spread her hands, as if she didn't know anything. However, Asaba Kazuma knew Amamiyamai well, and naturally knew that her current attitude was a sign of a guilty conscience. If she thought that none of this was a problem, then she should probably be sitting there with her legs crossed, drinking coffee slowly and watching Jen's jokes, instead of being so restless now. Kinya Kazuma scratched his head. I told you before that you must think carefully before using this kind of operation. Not bad now. After the incident was committed, she began to look at him for help. Asaba Kazuma simply closed his eyes, spread his hands, and made an expression as if he had no choice. I can't help you, we are accomplices. Amamiyamai looked a little embarrassed. although she didn't have any excuses to deal with Yuan's AI. For example, she had repeatedly emphasized to Yuan's AI before that if she was asked to help Yuan Zhenxian, Yuan's AI would have to bear the consequences. This is the consequence you have to pay. But she was thinking very well at the time, but when she really encountered such a scene, she was speechless. After all, Amamiya Mai is just a young girl who has just grown up. Even if you are in Genji, no matter how many evil people you have experienced, you will never be as shameless as some real veterans when it comes to this kind of thing. If it were an old man like Chen Go from I really didn't want to be reborn, he could just throw the problem to Yuan's AI with a single card and let him think about whether he had made any mistakes. I really didn't expect that my two daughters, who seem to be a bit crazy on weekdays, but are also able to understand the seriousness of the problem in major matters, would actually do such ridiculous things. A helpless smile appeared on Minamoto's AI's elegant face, and then his eyes gradually became sharp. Now the question is, which of my two daughters do you want to choose? Yuan's AI's voice was filled with a sonorous fire quality. Obviously now he can sit here quietly without losing his manners, which is already a good example of self-cultivation. Moreover, he obviously did not give the I want them all option. Now he is like a lion who is still in the hunting stage and has not yet shown a real attack posture. But that doesn't mean he won't attack. Whether it will attack or not depends on the condition of the prey. In other words, what is Asaba Kazuma's attitude? Just when Asaba Kazuma took a deep breath and wanted to say something, Minamoto Shinzen suddenly spoke. "Dad, please don't worry about this. I agreed to it myself. I already thought about the outcome from the beginning." Gen said something with a smile. Asaba Kazuma and Amamiya Mai looked at each other. It seemed like this was trying to smooth things over for them. Yuan's AI frowned and put on a calm expression on his face. Asaba Kazuma and Amamiya Mai's brows jumped, feeling that Minamoto's AI was about to explode. Unexpectedly, Yuan Zhenxian suddenly said, "Father, the Son of God project has transformed me from a normal person into a cripple who has been in a wheelchair for many years. Finally, I have such an opportunity. I can stand up again. Do you think I should make such a choice? What's more, I don't hate Asaba Kazuma. It can even be said that in every sense, he is the other half that best meets my expectations. Now that my sister has taken the lead, I am using this method to try to get closer to him. I have already made a mistake, so Dad, please don't mention it again, okay?" After saying that, Minamoto Shinjin blinked and added the words that made Minamoto's AI heartbroken the most. "What's more, didn't you tell your sister that you can bear any consequences for me? This is the consequence." Kinya Kazuma was shocked. Whose black-hearted little cotton-padded jacket is this? How could he harm his father like this? Anyway, after Yuan Zhenxian said this, the expression on Yuan's AI's face changed again, and finally he could only slap his face. "Forget it, I can't understand what you young people are doing. Just do whatever you like." Yuan's AI was ruined on the spot. Yuan's AI left angrily. When he left, his face was full of regret. He regretted extremely why he didn't ask clearly what the situation was. As for Amamiya Mai and Genma, they stayed directly, and the atmosphere between the three became even more awkward. In simulation space. Looking at this situation, Kinya Kazuma had a strange smile on his face. What on earth does this guy Genzan want to do? Asahi Kazuma rubbed his eyes. It always felt like during these several simulations, he suddenly stopped thinking and returned directly to the simulation space more and more times. Obviously it could last for a long time in the past. The frequency of interruptions is a bit too high now. When did it start? Asaba Kazuma thought about it for a while, and soon remembered that the time point when she started to lose focus often and quit the love simulation was from Amamiya Mai's simulation. Maybe it's because Amamiya Mai's simulation took too long? Kinya Kazuma couldn't help but have such a question in her heart. Just when he was about to focus on the simulation again, Asahi Kazuma was stunned for a moment. Drop. Diddy. Diddy diddy. The sound of cell phone ringing came to mind, and he realized that the sound came from reality. It was very rare for him to log off directly from the simulation space and return to reality. After glancing at the shiny mobile phone on the bedside, he picked it up and looked at it. The person who made the call turned out to be Maya. Why is she calling me at this time? Doesn't she know very well that I am now deducing the future? But Asahi Kazuma still answered the phone without hesitation. Because he knew that Amamaya was a very particular person. If something happened to Hurayang and she still had to call him even though he was very busy, then something must have happened that she felt she had to find him. Matter. After answering the phone, Kinha Kazuma heard Amamaya's somewhat panicked voice. Kazuma, what's going on there? Kinha Kazuma was stunned for a moment, then comforted her and said, don't be anxious. What happened to make you so panicked? Amamaya said in a heavy voice, is your talent for deducing the future out of control? Kinha Kazuma was stunned for a moment, how to say? Amamaya's voice was full of helplessness, I just had a phone call with Shiana Kane. What is certain is that when you deduce the future this time, Shiana Yuan also has relevant memories. Kinha Kazuma's heart, which was originally calm, suddenly jumped wildly. Wait for me to make a few more calls. After Asahi Kazuma finished speaking, he hung up the phone. After a while, his call reached Rina Ishihara. As expected, Ishihara Rina also has the future memory of this deduction. This unprecedented situation made Asahi Kazuma a little confused. Could it be that everyone around the world directly shared future memories with him? He made phone calls one after another. Hours later, after repeated phone calls with trusted people, he finally determined the answers to several questions. The first question, are the vast majority of people directly sharing future memories with him? Answer, no. At least after conducting listening tests with company employees and parents, he was able to confirm that they did not possess this memory. Second question, who are the people he knows so far who share the memory of deducing the future with him? Rina Ishihara, Yuan Shiana, Maya Amamaya. The three of them were the only ones he knew about at the moment. Of course, there is probably another person. For example, Minamoto Shinzen. However, this should not be verified by him. After all, he and Gen Zhenxian have no connection at all in reality. Before Asahi Kazuma could get a clear answer from Amamaya, the phone rang directly. This time, it was a phone number that Asahi Kazuma had not marked. He hesitated for a moment, but finally answered the call, because when he saw the call, he already knew who was calling. Hello, who are you? Minamoto Mizuru, please give me some advice, Asahi Kazuma. Kinha Kazuma. The thing that troubled him the most happened. Gen Zhenxian actually broke through the blockade and had the memory of the future. Why is this? She didn't even get the memory to deduce the future through the normal way of clearing the love simulation. This situation completely exceeded his understanding of Kyunulu, Love is War 2077. Perhaps he noticed that Asahi Kazuma had not spoken for a long time and was still in shock. Gen said calmly. No need to be surprised. It is purely a coincidence that I was able to break through the blockade of adjusting your talent this time. How did you do it? Kinha Kazuma finally couldn't help but ask. He doesn't understand, he really doesn't understand. Your adjustment talent is indeed very strong, and it can even be said that it has exceeded our knowledge and understanding of adjustment talent. Any other adjuster, even if Princess Kaguya comes over, it is impossible to have such a terrifying talent with such promising development prospects as yours. But have you forgotten that my adjustment talent, sensory sharing, is essentially a talent that can only take effect normally after implanting an idea into others? So do you think it is possible that your ability to deduce and visualize the future will directly bring my future self's thoughts to this era? After all, theoretically speaking, when I implant my thoughts into your body, we are one for this period of time. Asahikazuma's face turned completely dark when he heard this. How could such a thing happen? So, Minamoto, what do you want to do? You don't want to do anything? Didn't I say it before? You are my benefactor. No matter what happens, I will never take revenge on my benefactor, right?